Chapter 328. Upon hearing that, Helian Jiaoer was completely paralyzed on the ground. She had never thought that it would end up like this. Her mother's guesses were all wrong. His Highness would not be influenced by anyone. Even if Yun Biluo was here, it would still be the same. Murong Changfeng could not react in time as well. It was as if he could see their long-term plan collapsing all of a sudden. Both his father and his aunt had underestimated Beligaju. Yun Biluo had no choice but to bite her thin lips and look at Shadow, who was standing aside. Shadow did not dare to speak at this time. But even if he did not speak, Beligaju did not intend to let him go easily. He reached out his hand and patted his face gently. His devilish face was extremely handsome. "Shadow, how many years have you been with me? I gave you the task and you fooled me like this. What did I say? You have to tell me immediately if anyone goes to the princess. Why is it an exception this time? It seems that I did not use the right means." Upon hearing that, Shadow's face turned extremely pale. "Your Highness, please listen to me. I didn't know that Miss Yun went to the princess. Then what do you know?" All of a sudden, Bailey Jiaju grabbed his throat. That kind of strength and coldness shocked all the Shadow guards. Shadow was in great pain, but he knew that this time he thought too highly of himself. "Your Highness, it's my fault." "Shut up." Bailey Jiaju retracted his hand and said in an indifferent tone, "I'll give you one last chance to settle this matter properly. Otherwise, everyone will stay underground and never come out again in this lifetime." As soon as the words left his mouth, not only the Shadow guards, but also the faces of those death attendants changed. One after another, they lowered their heads and no longer dared to show any disrespect to Wei Wei. However, at this time, Yun Biluo saw Beligaju walking past her indifferently and suddenly panicked. "Your Highness, if you don't want me to disturb Miss Wei Wei, I won't bother her in the future. If I knew that knowing her would make you so unhappy, I would never do it." As Yun Biluo spoke, she reached out and grabbed Bailey Jiaju's sleeves in a panic. Her beautiful eyes could not help but sparkle, revealing a touch of vulnerability and grievance that could not be concealed. Beligaju stopped and looked up at her. He said indifferently, "Then disappear completely. Don't play tricks in front of me." Upon hearing this, Yun Biluo's face turned even paler. Although she spoke in such a light tone, she could not withstand the icy glare he gave her. She explained in a daze, "I just want to see." However, Bailey Jiaju didn't have the intention to talk to her again. His tall and handsome body directly walked past her. Yun Biluo's aggrieved and choked voice was heard. Her pale and fragile face made one feel pity for her. Helian Vivian could not move, but she could still hear. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Beligaju, who was walking toward her. She did not say much because her lower abdomen was hurting too much. It was so painful that she only had one question from the beginning. Was the royal family doing this to help her vent her anger? It should be. However, it was the first time she heard him say so much. Her words were even more hurtful than her actions. At least she did not have the ability to make people cry. Wasn't Yun Biluo the person he loved the most? Hatred born from love? Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows again. "Shadow." Beligaju walked to Helian Vivian. He looked at her but ordered the people around him, "Take care of the aftermath. I have something to discuss with the princess." Helian Vivian was speechless. Discuss what? You had the guts to part peacefully with me, but now you don't have the guts to look at me?" The man's voice rang in her ears. Helian Vivian thought that she could not move because she was immobilized by the body-fixing spell. "What did this have to do with guts? Have I ever told you that your brain doesn't work at all?" Bailey Jiaju's voice was filled with cold ridicule. Helian Wei Wei faintly hummed in agreement. This person always attacked her IQ, and said it more than once. "When other people come knocking on your door to steal your man, where did your toughness go?" Bailey Jiaju's graceful and luxurious voice sounded a little strange at this time. "Her man? Aren't you known as the arrogant playboy who can defeat anyone in the world?" Beligaju reached out and lifted her chin. Helian Vivian felt that it was time for her to hold her head high. She said calmly, "That was sealed." Helian Vivian felt that Beligaju's eyes were colder after she finished speaking. She thought for a while and added, "Actually, I am like that. Of course, I can't let others steal my things. So I returned them. Miss Yun didn't get any advantage from me. Anyway, she knew how to be lenient if she was honest. Unexpectedly, Bailey Jiaju did not get angry but laughed instead. Then he added, "Next time, just reveal your identity. Remember, you're the one who's going to be the third princess consort, not anyone here." As he said, he glanced at the crowd. Just a moment ago, everyone had witnessed the legendary third prince's methods. At this moment, no one dared to show their face. Ning stayed behind to deal with the aftermath. Everyone was behaving abnormally. Qing Zhan stood at the side. She felt that there was nothing but surprise in her heart. This was the first time that she saw His Highness speaking for someone in public. Moreover, it seemed that he was here to help the princess consort. In any case, the students had completely settled down. The masters from each courtyard wanted to meet Beligaju alone. All of them were rejected by Shadow with an excuse: His Highness likes to be quiet. Just carry out the test as usual. Only then did the people remember that there was still the test to summon the mythical beast. But there was no doubt that Hellion Vivian, who summoned the dragon god, was the absolute winner. The dragon god was hovering above the inferior compound. There was a deep meaning in its eyes. It didn't know why, but it felt that the man in the house was strangely familiar to it. It was very concerned about this sense of familiarity. However, it knew that if it continued to hover, it would bring inconvenience to Hellion Vivian. So, it decided to go to the bottom of the lake first and wait until there were fewer people. After being restrained for so long, it also needed to recover its magical power in the room. Hellion Vivian was holding the quilt with sweat on her forehead. She looked up at Beligaju, who trapped her in the corner. She didn't understand what he meant. "Tell me, why do you want to terminate the contract?" Beligaju's voice was very calm. There was a hint of sarcasm in his cold tone. "You should have a reason to leave me." Chapter 329. Hellion Vivian glanced at her left hand that was held by him. "If my reason is good, will you unlock it? You really have the idea of leaving me?" Bailey Jiaju's slightly narrowed eyes suddenly sank. The depths of his eyes congealed with deepness. Looking at him made Wei Wei feel somewhat faintly uneasy. She couldn't help but look away. "Look at me, tell me, what are you thinking?" There was a hint of suppressed displeasure in his low voice, and the big hand around her waist tightened. That kind of strength made Hellion Vivian feel a slight pain in her waist. She could not help but frown, but her tone was indifferent. "I do have such thoughts. I don't know if you signed the contract purely to appease the retired emperor or to push me out to be Yun Biluo's shield. If it's the former, I can understand. But if it's the latter, I have to consider my own future and give myself a way out." "You're not a shield." Beligaju lowered his head and looked into her dark eyes. There were some complicated emotions, but he did not hide it. "You're a prey that I'm very interested in." Hellion Vivian rubbed her lower abdomen with a headache. "Yes, I know. He locked her up for no reason. If she was not a prey, then what was she? Moreover, from the way he treated her from the beginning, it was obvious that he was hunting, and he would use any means necessary. Does my prey need to be someone's shield?" Beligaju's voice was very slow. That kind of noble demeanor made Hellion Vivian speechless. However, at that moment, Hellion Vivian caught some information. Her eyes were fixed on Beligaju. "Your Highness, how many prey have you had?" Beligaju felt that she was simply changing the topic. When he answered, his long eyebrows were knitted together. Hellion Vivian's dark eyes were complicated. "One is me? The other is Fire Qilin?" Beligaju raised his thin lips with a faint smile. "Do you want me to punish you immediately by talking about this?" Hellion Vivian continued to look at him, until Beligaju pursed his thin lips into a straight line. She asked again, "What about Yun Biluo? Why don't you treat her as your prey? Do you think anyone can be this lord's prey?" Beligaju was very unhappy that she kept talking about this kind of unimportant issue. Even his tone was a little cold. After Hellion Wei Wei heard the other party's words, she was suddenly somewhat stunned. She thought of many scenarios, but he didn't expect it to be this kind of person. Apart from the Fire Qilin, there was only her. "Beligaju, have you never liked anyone before?" Hellion Vivian dragged her tired body and asked another question. Beligaju opened his mouth with a hint of mockery. Like? No wonder your EQ is so low. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She always felt that she had vaguely touched on some unknown secret. It was very possible. His Highness treated her a little differently. Although it was narcissistic to think so. But she could only understand it this way. Hellion Vivian had been involved in a case before. The serial killer had such a mentality. He would treat whoever he liked as his prey. Of course, she didn't mean that Beligaju had the tendency to be a serial killer. No, thinking about it carefully, he did have it. In short, Hellion Vivian didn't know why her face suddenly felt a little hot. She cleared her throat and said, "Others said that you treated Yun Biluo differently since you were young. Why didn't you just treat her as your prey?" "She was a maid left by my mother." After saying a few words, Beligaju said casually, "And I didn't like to keep prey when I was young. I only liked to kill." Hellion Vivian. "Your Highness, how did you grow up?" When Bailey Jiaju saw that Hellion Wei Wei did not speak, he thought that she was being disdainful of his actions. His smile became even colder. "What's the matter? Are you uncomfortable after hearing all this?" "No." After Hellion Wei Wei answered Bailey Jiaju's question, she instinctively thought of young Master Tang. No one would be willing to learn how to kill at a young age, unless it was absolutely necessary. After thinking for a while, she added, "I know what kind of place the palace is. You're just trying to protect yourself." Beligaju was stunned. Not because of anything else, but because the woman patted his head while talking. So, he thought that the prey was so interesting. So interesting that he didn't want to let go. Hellion Vivian also felt that her way of comforting people was too cool and not suitable for His Highness. But anyway, she had already moved, so she couldn't take back her hand. It was just that her stomach was too painful, and her face was a little pale. "Actually, I'm a little uncomfortable." "Where do you feel uncomfortable?" Bailey Jiaju moved his fingers. Hellion Vivian directly stopped him. "You don't have to unlock me, but I have to say that my robe is stained by my period." Even if he didn't understand the suffering of the world, Beligaju still knew what period was. He frowned and stood up from the soft couch. Hellion Vivian didn't know where he went, but he didn't unlock her robe before he left. She was too lazy to torment him. Especially after she guessed Beligaju's thoughts. She always felt that tormenting him would be a waste of her physical strength. Although she wanted to tell Beligaju that she was a person, a different kind of existence from the Fire Qilin. But even if she said it, His Highness wouldn't understand. It was more practical to sleep. Hellion Vivian turned sideways and pressed her lower abdomen with both hands. She was not very comfortable. Cold sweat overflowed from her forehead, making her feel like she was floating. She knew that Qing Zhan came in to change her robe. After that, she heard the noise outside from time to time. She always wanted to ask them to be quiet, but she was too lazy to speak. Let them do whatever they want. Of course, Beligaju wouldn't do it casually. He directly called the imperial physician from the palace. The imperial physician had been practicing medicine for many years, but it was the first time he was called in because of this. He was too embarrassed to check Hellion Vivian's pulse. He only said to Beligaju timidly, "Your Highness, when a woman is having her period, she will feel uncomfortable when she is exposed to cold air. She's in pain." Beligaju coldly interrupted the imperial physician. The imperial physician's scalp was numb from his long and narrow eyes. He reached out and wiped his forehead. "This will indeed cause a woman to suffer more. Is there any way to solve this?" Beligaju's long eyebrows were tighter, bringing out a strong sense of oppression. The imperial physician thought for a while. "Boil some ginger sugar water for this lady. Maybe she will feel better." Maybe? It was obvious that Beligaju was not satisfied with such an answer. "Give her some prescription that will cure her immediately." Prescription that will cure her immediately? The imperial physician was in a dilemma. "Your Highness, there is really no way to cure this kind of pain." There was no record of any medicine that could cure menstrual cramps immediately. Chapter 330. Beligaju looked at the imperial physician who was standing next to him without moving. In the end, he only threw 2 words at him, quack, quack quack. He had been practicing medicine for more than 10 years. When he was by the Emperor Emeritus' side, he had won a lot of prestige. Now, he was being called a quack because of menstrual cramps. The imperial physician felt very wronged and began to look up at the ceiling with tears streaming down his face. Beligaju lowered his eyes and no one knew what he was thinking. In the end, he frowned and began to order the imperial physician, "You, go and buy some ginger." The imperial physician exclaimed in surprise. Beligaju raised his eyebrows, "Don't you want to drink ginger sugar water?" The imperial physician was irritated by the way he looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. Since he thought that he was a quack, why did he still use his method? Although he was shouting, the imperial physician still bought what he needed to buy. He resigned himself to his fate and boiled the sugar water. Beligaju sat next to the soft bed and seemed to have thought of something. He threw the outer garment he wore today to an Ing, "Burn it?" Now, an Ing did not dare to ask why, even if this outer garment was newly made today and the fabric was the most expensive silk from Suzhou. Since His Highness found it dirty, he could only take it and burn it. Hellion Vivian was still sleeping. Her slightly wet black hair hit her small face. She looked like a trapped little beast. Even her claws were soft. Beligaju originally thought that he would like to see her like this. After all, this was the only way she could be peaceful. Now, he felt that it was an eyesore. His fingers held her wrist and softly drooped down. For some reason, he felt that it was not pleasing to the eye. When the imperial physician arrived, he saw this scene and was hesitating whether to bring the sugar water over. Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth, his clear and cold voice carried his usual command, "Put the bowl there." The imperial physician knew that at this time, he would not be tactful if he stayed. After putting the bowl down, he lowered his head and walked out. Beligaju picked up the porcelain bowl. Without thinking, he drank a mouthful of the sweet water. Then, he leaned over and pressed his thin lips against her pale lips, passing the sweet water to her. Qing Zhan was still serving by the side. When she saw this scene, her hands and feet stiffened as she retreated. Hellion Vivian was in a daze, but she felt very comfortable with the strength of the big hands on her waist. Coupled with the familiar smell of sandalwood around her, she fell into a deeper sleep. Beligaju hugged Hellion Vivian in his arms. His long legs were slightly crossed, and his robe was scattered. That posture looked very handsome. "No matter what, don't even think of leaving this palace." After a long time, he finally faintly said this sentence. Suddenly, he hugged Hellion way tightly and absorbed her thin body temperature. His eyes, which held power over the world, carried a rare sense of desolation. Night fell bit by bit. The wind was blowing on all sides of the mountain peak, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill. At this time, there was no sound in the surroundings of the defense general's residence. Except for Hellion Jiaoer's defeated cry, "Mother, what should I do? This time, I have nothing. Marrying Huang, that eunuch, I'd rather die." But what could she do? It was fine if the order was given by the royal family. Since Hellion Jiaoer came back, the Huai family blocked the entrance of the defense general's residence, saying that they wanted to marry the bride. Being forced to this point, Hellion Jiaoer could only marry over to shut the mouths of the people. There was no other way. Madame Su gritted her teeth. She hated Hellion Vivian to the extreme, but she could not think of anything. Hellion Guangyao looked at this pair of mother and daughter, his eyes narrowed again and again. Originally, he didn't want to get involved in this matter, but now that he didn't, his beloved daughter would really be ruined. This was not the main reason. All along, Hellion Guangyao had hoped that Hellion Jiaoer could marry into a good family, so he took care of her since she was young. Now, all of it was ruined. If he did not take action, that girl might really ride on his head. This was something that Hellion Guangyao could not tolerate. He pondered for a long time, and said in a heavy tone, "Jiaoer is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Whether she marries well will also affect the 4 great families. Madam, send someone to the sacrificial spiritual hall now and let the elders come forward to persuade the Huai family. As long as the Huai family takes the initiative to break off the engagement, Hellion Guangyao will give them satisfactory compensation." You mean to let the Huai family break off the engagement? Madame Su was stunned, but in this way, won't our family's Jiaoer become a girl whose engagement is broken off? Helian Guangyao glanced at her. This is the only thing we can do now. Breaking off the engagement is better than marrying into the Huai family. What's more, even if the engagement was broken off, there's still a dozen or so days before I can truly control the entire Helian clan. Jiao Er is my, Helian Guangyao's, daughter, and with the support of the 4 great clans, who wouldn't want to marry her in the future? Su Yanemo thought about it and immediately called someone over, carefully exhorting a few words, then said, "Old master, I really don't understand why Wei Wei is always against our Jiaoer, causing her to be so terrible every time. As her mother, I feel angry and indignant in my heart, but I can't do anything to her. Old master once said that we must keep her alive. After all, even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. But I see Wei Wei's attitude. She hates us to the extreme and wants to make us unhappy everywhere. I heard from my brother, not only has Jiaoer become like this, even the Su family's business in Jiangnan has been ruined by that girl. Old master, you can't let her go like this anymore." "Yes, father, you can't indulge her like this anymore." Helian Jiaoer cried pitifully. "It's not enough for her to hurt third sister, she also wants to hurt me. All day long, she thinks about how badly you treat her, but she doesn't think that if it wasn't for father, she would have starved to death on the side of the road. In fact, I don't want to blame eldest sister for these things, but eldest sister is really too much of a bully." "I know." Helian Guangyao raised his eyes. "You've said before that the girl's body was taken over by someone else. I've always kept this matter in mind. I've also contacted someone to help me investigate. There's already news from that side. She has also entered the White Academy. As for the rest, didn't that girl want to participate in the family meeting? I have long planned. It is easy to bribe a few elders, not to mention that I am the only one who may have the military seal. Even if that girl has the support of the third prince, it is useless. You just wait and see how she will be isolated from the family meeting that day, thinking that she can rely on her fists and martial qi to get the position? Heh, I won't give her the chance." Su Yenemo heard this and laughed happily. "I knew that old master has the best ideas. That little bastard wants to take back the general's residence. No way." Chapter 331. The Helian Jiaoer finally stopped crying when she saw the solution. Sure enough, the 4 influential families stepped in. The Huai residents did not say anything since their son had already married a daughter-in-law from the Helian family. Only a fool would not take the money when it was offered. They ordered the bridal escort to retreat from the defense general's residence. However, the Helian Jiaoer was still unhappy. She had fallen from being the most talented girl in the capital to someone whose engagement was broken off, and her father had to give so much money to the other party. How could she take this lying down? However, mother, you have underestimated the third prince. He was not affected by Yun Biluo at all. Did we make the wrong move? Su Yen Mo patted her hand. Who said that he was not affected? Think about it carefully. If there was someone around you for so many years, disappearing and coming back just like that, you would definitely be unhappy. Look at this time, the third prince obviously did not forget about Yun Biluo. Since he did not forget, there is hope for everything. The Helian Jiaoer bit her lip as she listened. But mother, you don't know. The third prince always sided with that little bitch Helian Vivian to avenge her. I am worried. Jiao. Su Yenmo's tone was indifferent. She is the third princess consort. You have not thought it through this time and challenged the third princess consort's authority in front of others. The emperor's authority is not something that can be casually said. A person like the third prince will not allow anyone to belittle his chosen princess consort. The Helian Jiaoer took a deep breath unwillingly. Then mother, what do you think I should do? You don't have to go to the academy during this period of time. It's not suitable for me to attend gatherings in the capital recently. Wait until your father truly removes that little bastard from the family, then everything will be better. Su Yen Mo stroked Helian Jiaoer's long hair and looked at Helian Guangyao. Some time ago, her business was in a mess and she did not have much money on hand. However, she did not know what Helian Guangyao was doing recently. She had a feeling that he was hiding something from her. Perhaps it was because she was too paranoid. When she went to see those madams for a few days in a row, she felt that they had something to say. That feeling of being pointed at and gossiped about really made her feel uncomfortable. He wanted to have a good talk with Helian Guangyao, but he could not find the time. They had just finished discussing this matter. Then, someone whispered something in Helian Guangyao's ear. Helian Guangyao stood up and said to the Helian Jiaoer and Su Yenmo, "I still have matters to attend to in the imperial court. I'll take my leave first." Su Yenmo hurriedly escorted him out. The steward followed beside Helian Guangyao. Seeing that they could no longer see the entrance of the general's residence, he blurted out his worries. "Old master, Miss Lien Er's injury should be fine. It's better for you to accompany Madam and Miss at this time. If the Su family finds out, I'm afraid the situation will be disadvantageous to you." Helian Guangyao thought about it for a moment, then retracted the foot that was about to step out. "I'll listen to you. I'll take a stroll back to the manor." The two of them really did take a stroll. When Helian Guangyao returned, Su Yenmo was still awake. She was pleasantly surprised to see him and wanted to talk to him. However, Helian Guangyao looked very tired, so Su Yenmo could only give up. Thinking that she would be able to deal with Helian Vivian soon, she felt a burst of joy in her heart and closed her eyes not long after. However, what she did not know was that Helian Guangyao was not asleep. Instead, he was full of thoughts, but those thoughts were not in her heart at all. The night deepened a little. When Beligaju woke up, Helian Vivian seemed to be much more comfortable. Her face was also rosy. He reached out his hand, intending to poke Helian Vivian's face. He did not expect that someone would not know peace in her sleep and would grab his finger and put it in her mouth like food. Helian Vivian's bite did not hurt. Her long eyelashes were half-curved, and the tip of her small tongue slid across Beligaju's finger. Still warm, Beligaju only felt a strange sensation from his fingertips to his lower abdomen, faintly tickling. His eyes suddenly darkened, and without the slightest hesitation, he leaned over and kissed her neck. Probably because this area was more sensitive, Helian Vivian instantly tensed up, her fingers grasping Beligaju's clothes tightly. The two of them were very close to each other. Beligaju reached out and pressed the back of her head, inserting his fingers into Helian Vivian's hair, gently stroking it, watching the other's soft hair slide down between his fingers like flowing water. His mind was completely immersed in it. The gentle pressure on her scalp made the sleeping Helian Wei feel exceptionally comfortable. She let out a long sigh. Her hoarse voice made the itch in the bottom of Bailey Jiaju's heart even stronger. He squinted and suddenly stood up, striding to the side of the copper basin, sprinkling cold water on his face. He looked at the unfamiliar self in the copper mirror, his long eyebrows slightly furrowed. But compared to this, he could feel his heart beating so violently, almost breaking through the thin layer of flesh on his chest. What kind of feeling was this? Damn it. Beligaju glanced at his own legs, looking at the unfamiliar self in the mirror. It was obvious that he needed to calm down. Since he could not play with his prey, then he could only kill. Beligaju retracted his gaze from the copper mirror, then strolled out. The number of shadow guards was 3 times more than usual. His Highness chose to reveal his identity, which meant that the White Academy would not be peaceful in the future. After retired Emperor found out, he also couldn't do anything to him. However, he wasn't completely worried that those people from the 4 great clans would harm Bailey Jiaju. He was afraid that Bailey Jiaju would be angered and accidentally fall into the devil's path. Shadow knew the retired Emperor's thoughts, so there were some things that he did not want His Highness to do personally under normal circumstances. However, he knew that His Highness was really angry today. From his reaction during the day, Shadow knew that there would be a follow-up to this matter. Call by May over. Beligaju stood under the sparse shadows of the trees, casually turning the ring on his finger. Shadow paused, and without any hesitation, he went to find Bai Mei. Beligaju sat on the rattan chair, holding his chin with one hand, casually flipping through the scroll in his hand. Do you want to know where Heizhu went? Bai Mei did not understand why His Highness suddenly mentioned Heizhu, but she felt that the atmosphere was a little wrong, and her whole body was a little cold. Beligaju turned another page of the scroll and said, "Show her the thing." Bai Mei heard this, turned around and saw Heizhu's pale face. She suddenly panicked, and with a bang, she knelt on the ground. Chapter 332. Your Highness, Bai Mei wanted to explain. Bailey Jiaju coldly glanced at her and said, "You good sisters have just met, why are you still so nervous?" As a death attendant, she was not afraid of death, but she was afraid of Beligaju at this moment. She was a little regretful, regretting that she acted on her own accord before. "I have overestimated your IQ." Bailey Jiaju looked at her with a slight smile, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "She is my prey. Usually, I can't bear to let her get hurt, but you guys are good, making her think about how to leave me." After hearing this, Bai Mei's breath froze, and she tried to explain, I thought Sister Yun was the one who, bang. Bai Mei did not finish her words. Beligaju waved his sleeve and threw her more than a meter away. Bai Mei coughed in pain, and blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Beligaju acted as if he did not see it, and stood up slowly. "How is the situation at the general's residence?" "Reporting to your highness, the people at the Huai residence have accepted the money from the 4 influential families and cancelled the marriage with Helian Jiao," Shadow said as he gave a look to the people beside him. The shadow guards bowed their heads and carried the half-dead Bai Mei away. From now on, they understood the principle of seeing the princess consort as if she was seeing his highness. Beligaju listened to Shadow's report and smiled evilly. "Canceling the marriage? The Huai residence dares to cancel the marriage that I granted? How dare they?" Shadow lowered his head. Of course they have the guts. They know that Master is not to be trifled with, but they still made the decision at this time. "Hand over the evidence of the Huai residence's corruption over the years to the retired emperor. Since the Huai residence does not want to hold a wedding, let them hold a funeral," Beligaju said very lightly. Shadow could imagine how miserable the Huai residence would be in the future. What about the general's residence? Let Lan Lian continue, Helian Guangyao won't be able to hold on much longer. At this point, Beligaju sneered, that woman's methods are still a little too soft. Of course, when dealing with people like Su Yen Mo, an eye for an eye. The Fire Qilin didn't want to say it, but it couldn't hold it in anymore. "Master, no one in this world is more despicable than you." Really? Sending a death attendant to seduce Helian Guangyao was something only its master could think of. It was so sinister. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and glanced at it. The fire unicorn shrunk its big head in fear. "What I mean is, why did you get involved in this kind of thing?" It was obvious that it disdained fighting between humans the most. Beligaju put the book in his hand on the wooden table. "As a qualified host, of course I have to know how to feed it. So, was it because of Helian Vivian? When I was your prey, you never fed me." The fire unicorn stretched its neck to fight for its own benefits. Bailey Jiaju glanced at it faintly. "Didn't I feed you vegetables? I'm a carnivore." The fire unicorn couldn't help but want to roar. But Beligaju was obviously tired of it and was about to cut off the stream of consciousness. The fire unicorn hurriedly stopped him. Wait. Master, I think you should tell Miss Vivian about this. Otherwise, if you do so much and she doesn't know about it, wouldn't it be a waste?" Sigh, a master who has never been in love, even this kind of thing has to worry about it. In this world, there is absolutely no second mythical beast that is more versatile than him. Master, think about it. If Miss Vivian knows about this news, she will definitely be very touched. When a woman is touched, she will throw herself into your arms. The fire unicorn kept talking about its point of view. Usually, Beligaju would have shut it up by now, but today, he listened to the whole story. The fire unicorn suddenly felt that its position in its master's heart had improved a lot. It puffed up its chest and stroked its handsome fiery red fur. It couldn't be more proud. On the other hand, the little animals who were scared by the green dragon felt like crying again. They hid in the corner and didn't dare to come out, for fear of touching the fire unicorn's fur. Deep in the courtyard, the man looked at Yun Biluo in front of him. "Is this the influence you mentioned? His Highness and I had some misunderstandings before." Yun Biluo thought for a while and raised her beautiful face. But I believe that these misunderstandings will be cleared up one day. I need time. The man tilted his head and thought for a while before standing up. Hellion Vivian can even summon the green dragon. What do you think your chances of winning are? Yun Biluo's fingers tightened at the mention of this. There is one last test for the battle dragon army. Someone wants Hellion Vivian to lose more than I do. Heh. The man chuckled. These tricks again. All right, you can leave now. Yun Biluo retreated sideways. She controlled herself for a long time and didn't look for Beligaju. She told herself that if this was the price she had to pay for her betrayal, she would do anything as long as it could appease His Highness. However, what bothered her was that she couldn't even get in touch with Bai Mei. Yun Biluo narrowed her eyes and walked forward. The demon-transforming beast was hiding in the corner and looking at her with one of its red eyes. After Yun Biluo left, it appeared in front of the man. Master, we sacrificed the blood snake beast because of her. It's not worth it. The man's fingers paused. He didn't look happy at all. The demon-transforming beast knew that it shouldn't say this, but it said, I've never seen a human like Beligaju. But if it wasn't for the fire unicorn, he wouldn't have noticed the blood snake beast. But somehow, the fire unicorn was crazy enough to be his divine beast. It's hard for the bone-eroding beast and the rest to show themselves. I'm afraid that the fire unicorn would notice them and ruin Master's plan. Then I'll possess the human body. The man retracted his gaze. The wills of the elders of the 4 great clans are about to be worn down. After drinking the blood of the spirit beasts this time, you can control their skins as you please. You can sit in whichever position you want. As for the fire unicorn, leave it to the azure dragon. The demon-transforming beast frowned at the last sentence. That's impossible. Although the fire unicorn and the azure dragon were not on good terms before, they were both under the command of that man. They shouldn't fight. Hellion Vivian can summon the azure dragon, but she can't contract it. The man used a very indifferent voice to speak tirelessly. Once the mysterious ice iron chain is undone, it also means that the azure dragon's body no longer has any restrictions. The azure dragon's appearance depends on the chi around it. When the azure dragon was trapped at the bottom of the lake, it was only because the White Academy was full of auspicious chi that allowed it to maintain its nature. Chapter 333. What the azure dragon looks like depends on the chi around it. When the azure dragon was trapped at the bottom of the lake, it was because of the auspicious chi in the White Academy that allowed it to maintain its nature. As long as the auspicious chi in the White Academy is destroyed, the azure dragon will be demonized and be used by me. The demon-transforming beast's eyes lit up. Master has a way. I'll go and tell the bone-eroding beast now. The man nodded. The corner of his mouth slowly curved up, bringing out a never-before-seen evil aura. It's time for the world ruled by humans to come to an end. Pitter-patter. The night rain droplets fell on the wide leaves. When Hellion Wei Wei woke up, she subconsciously tugged at her locked left hand. Then she looked at the man lying next to her. Only then did she realize that her clothes had been changed. Her stomach no longer hurt, and she felt indescribably comfortable. She slept for a very long time. She licked her lips and wanted to drink water. While she was deep in thought, Bailey Jiaju woke up. He glanced at her faintly, then took the porcelain cup and brought it to her lips. That tone was no different from keeping a pet. Hellion Vivian thought for a while. She moved her fingers and unlocked herself first. Then, she drank the cup of water under Beligaju's slightly cold gaze. After she finished drinking, she locked herself in again. She was so obedient that she couldn't be any more obedient. As expected, the royal was very satisfied with her behavior. He helped her comb her long hair with his fingers, hugged her, and closed his eyes. Hellion Vivian's current mood was really hard to describe. Unfortunately, Yuan Ming still jumped out to stir up trouble. That devilish tone of his was not just a little bit. In any case, he likes you a little bit. You might as well pounce on him. What is more important than cultivation? Truly a foolish woman. Shut up. Hellion Vivian only gave Yuan Ming 3 words. Yuan Ming hooked his thin lips carelessly. Even if you don't pounce on him now, you still have 8 days at most. What are you hesitating for? Do you want me to burn you, Hellion Vivian's tone carried a hint of threat. Yuan Ming snorted twice. I won't say any more, I won't say any more. 8 days, you remember 8 days. Hellion Wei Wei had a bit of a headache, so she simply cut off the telepathic communication with Yuan Ming. When she raised her eyes, she discovered that Bailey Jiaju was looking at her. His thin lips even carried a bit of devilishness as he said, "If you had always been so obedient, I wouldn't have gotten angry." Lock himself up? Was this considered obedient? Sure enough, that was what His Highness was thinking. So, she went to the bathroom. Hellion Vivian unlocked herself and locked herself up again. She was so familiar with it that she couldn't be more familiar with it. So when the little 7th prince came over, he was a little confused about what was going on. Because this was the first time he had seen someone who was willing to lock themselves up. So she instinctively asked Beligaju, "Third brother, what is third sister-in-law doing?" "Your third sister-in-law likes to play role-play." Beligaju leisurely crossed his legs and put his arms behind his head. His tone was cold and there wasn't a trace of change in it, as if he was just stating a fact. The little 7th prince already understood what role-play meant. This was all thanks to His Highness' special education. So when he said these words, he glanced at Hellion Vivian. "So third sister-in-law likes this?" Hellion Vivian. "Ha! Who is this person who likes to play role-play?" Beligaju had already answered for her. The little 7th prince tilted his head and thought for a moment, then said, "But I want to eat snake meat. I've already put the snake head at the door." "Third sister-in-law, don't you know how to cook? Let third sister-in-law roast it for me. Do you think your third sister-in-law is a chef?" Beligaju glanced at him. "And only pigs like to eat snakes?" The dignified little 7th prince hesitated for a moment and said, "I just took the snake head to feed the pig, but the pig didn't eat it and kept trembling." "Why are you feeding the pig snake?" Beligaju raised an eyebrow. The little 7th prince was very domineering, to fatten it up and eat it. "The pig won't eat anything you feed it, because it already knows what you're trying to do," Beligaju said as he adjusted his sleeves. The little 7th prince frowned. "Then I'll hide in a corner and secretly feed it in the future." Hellion Vivian. So this was how His Highness usually tricked children. The pig was obviously scared by the snake head. What did he mean by knowing what little 7th prince was trying to do? "Then can I ask third sister-in-law to roast the snake for me first? After that, I'll go feed the pig." Obviously, Beligaju underestimated his little brother's obsession with food. He glanced at the little one again. "Sure." After getting Beligaju's approval, the little one was very happy. He strode with his short legs and wanted to carry the snake head in. Beligaju continued, "But you have to dance first." Hearing this, the little one's back shook and he subconsciously covered his little butt with his hands. That action was so cute that Hellion Vivian couldn't help but laugh out loud. "There's no need to dance." "But isn't the snake a demonic beast? Will it be bad to eat it?" Hellion Vivian only knew that if it was a spirit beast, it might be helpful for cultivation. However, only people who were evil cultivators could eat it. If it was a demonic beast, wouldn't it be more disadvantageous? The little one put on a serious face. "I can eat anything." Hellion Vivian face-bombed. "I know you're a foodie." She never doubted little 7's ability to eat. What she considered was the consequences. "It's okay." Beligaju spoke at this time and his voice was calm. "He can digest anything." Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. "What is his stomach made of?" Beligaju didn't say anything. The little one took out a meat bun from his pocket and said, "I'll eat this first." As he ate, he seemed to have thought of something and said fiercely, "Oh right, when the dean gave me the meat bun, he wanted me to tell third sister-in-law that he's going to announce the content of the third test. You should tell her first." Hellion Vivian felt defeated for the first time. "But the lock on her hand?" Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju again. "I'll be back in a while." Beligaju's eyes were cold, but he didn't agree. Hellion Vivian smiled. She felt that he was like a noble and lazy Persian cat. She couldn't go wrong by stroking his fur. Thus, she turned her face to the side and kissed him on the forehead with a slight smile on her lips. Beligaju's fingers froze. Before he could react, the person beside him was gone. Helly and Vivian didn't stay for long. She carried little seventh prince and rushed to the underground palace. Bailey Jiaju furrowed his long eyebrows. After that, he suddenly leaped up and stood up. His slender fingers fell on the area that Wei Wei had just touched. Chapter 334. Your Highness. When Shadow walked in from the outside, he saw Bailey Jiaju's appearance. His pair of eyes flashed with a trace of heavy astonishment. His Highness is smiling? Since young, His Highness had always been a person who did not show his emotions. He would sneer, laugh evilly, and smile faintly. But he was rarely like this. Is there something good happening today? But the Princess Consort is not here? Shadow could not understand his master's thoughts. He bowed his head respectfully and knelt on the ground. We have news about the hidden ground beast. Hellion Guangyao has been suspecting that the Princess Consort has been possessed, so he sent people into the academy to investigate. Hellion Guangyao? Beligaju turned the ring on his finger. His eyes were deep. It's not him. He doesn't have the ability to summon the hidden ground beast. Continue investigating. Shadow received the order and was about to leave. Yet she heard Bailey Jiaju continue to say, investigate from within the White Academy. Shadow lowered his eyes, but his heart was in a mess. Does Master mean that the person who harmed me and the Princess Consort is most likely a student and a teacher? When Aning thought of this, he broke out in cold sweat. When he looked back, he saw that His Highness had returned to his previous posture. His finger brushed across his forehead, and then he sneered. He seemed to have said something. You've learned to be smart this time. Indeed, it's better to lock up the prey. At noon, in the underground palace, Tu Su Feng stood up from his chair and looked at the row of students in front of him. His eyes were gloomy. The last test was not supposed to be so early, but yesterday, we lost another outstanding member. Is it because of the blood snake demon? The one who spoke was an outstanding member selected from the 4 great families. Tu Su Feng glanced in his direction. No, there's a problem in the forest of fantasy. Hellion Vivian held the little 7th prince's hand and frowned. He hadn't thought about what to do next. Tu Su Feng's voice was calm as he said, the battle spirit forces need you all, fresh blood. Therefore, the test has been brought forward. I want you all to show your true strength to face this test, because this test is not only about winning or losing, but also life and death. If you are caught, you can only save yourselves. As he spoke, Tu Su Feng spread the letter in his hand on the wooden table, indicating for them to come over and take a look. Tonight, there will be an auction in the capital. Speaking up to here, Tu Su Feng paused for a moment. This auction is personally organized by the Armament City's city lord. When the time comes, there will be countless martial arts aristocratic families participating in this auction. I want you guys to think of a way to get close to this person. After that, find out what he's been doing recently. Hellion Vivian looked at the name on the letter and raised an eyebrow. Murong Hongtu? Isn't this Empress Murong's younger brother, Murong Changfeng's uncle? A rank 1 minister of the imperial court, who also held some military power, usually did things very arrogantly. If he was a barbarian, it would be easy to deal with him. However, Murong Hongtu was a very smart person. The things he did could be said to be ruthless and inhumane, but he would never let the imperial family get hold of his weakness. Even those ministers who were loyal to the retired emperor would not dare to provoke such a person. Now, if they were to ask these immature people to go over, they might be able to see through their disguise in a few seconds. For people had already been eliminated from the first 2 tests. Now, the remaining 6 people, other than Hellion Vivian and the rest, were the 2 outstanding people selected from the 4 influential families. We'll complete the mission. Probably because they were very confident in themselves, the 2 people looked at each other, then looked at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo expressed that she had no problem with it. Hellion Vivian naturally did not say anything, she just listened quietly. If the other party was Murong Hongtu, there was one thing that they had to pay attention to. It was unknown if it was because he had done too many bad things, but he would always bring a group of experts with him when he went out. In order to get information from Murong Hongtu without making a sound, The first thing they had to deal with was this group of experts. You can choose your favorite martial practice and outfit. I don't care what method you use to get close to him, my only request is to keep this test a secret. At the same time when Tu Su Feng finished speaking, everyone had quickly chosen their own equipment. They stood in a straight line in front of Tu Su Feng. It was not difficult for Tu Su Feng to get the invitation to the auction. However, they could not enter as students of the White Academy. This operation was undoubtedly more difficult to deal with than the one-on-one tests. Not only did it require the cooperation of the team, but it also required the individual's ability to stand out in the team. It was simply too difficult. Moreover, the two young masters of the four influential families obviously only knew the theory but had never put it into practice. After taking the task, they began to arrange the members. Logically speaking, their method of seduction was not bad. Yun Biluo's appearance was enough to attract Murong Hongtu's attention. However, they arranged Hellion Vivian, who had performed the best during this period, to be in the corner and let Hellion Vivian be the lookout. Yuan Ming sneered, "These people are doing this on purpose. You have already won twice, so they simply don't want you to have a chance to perform in this test. This kind of method is really somewhat unpresentable." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and tidied up her waiter outfit, her expression indifferent. Things won't go according to their plan. The seduction won't have much effect on Murong Hongtu. I saw you nodding just now, so I thought you agreed with their plan. Xiao Bai also spoke, her voice was cold. Hellion Wei Wei stood up straight. I did agree, but as a person, you should always have a backup plan. They had to make a move on a person. They had to figure out what this person was interested in before they could have a chance to get close to him. This was the most important step in Hellion Vivian's opinion. However, these people had omitted this step. However, for Yun Biluo and the other two young masters who had been Deadpool, they more or less understood Murong Hongtu. At least compared to Han Yu and Shao Qi, they had a relative advantage. The auction was organized by the city master of Armament City, so of course, it was up to Han Yu to arrange how to secretly enter the auction. In fact, they did not need Hellion Vivian to sneak into the auction as a waiter. Han Yu could easily find out where Murong Hongtu was sitting without anyone noticing. Here, Han Yu could easily find out where Murong Hongtu was sitting. Therefore, this was also the reason why Yuan Ming said that they did not want to give Hellion Wei Wei any chance to perform. Chapter 335. Young Master Han. A man dressed as a steward walked out of the dazzling auction house. He smiled when he saw Han Yu. Who are these people? Han Yu's expression was indifferent. My friends. So they are young Master Han's friends. Please come in. The steward led the few of them in. Along the way, he could not help but turn around to take a few glances at Yun Biluo, who was wearing a veil. He did not know which family this beautiful lady belonged to, but since she came with young Master Han, she must be from an extraordinary background. They looked at each other as soon as they entered the auction house. They looked at each other with a look that only they could understand and went to different positions. Hellion Wei Wei didn't really wear a set of waiter's clothes. Instead, she draped a green and white robe over her shoulders. She held a fan in her hand and a jade pendant hung on her waist. Every part of her was clearly graceful and luxurious. She looked like a young master from an aristocratic family who came to participate in the auction. However, she had a unique hobby. She did not bring a single servant with her. She walked casually to the second floor. The corridor on the second floor was filled with martial artists carrying swords and wearing long robes. Hellion Wei Wei knew that she couldn't force her way into this place as soon as she walked in. Young master, please show your waist token. The martial artist guarding the corridor reached out and stopped her, his face expressionless. Waist token? The light in Wei Wei's eyes slightly flashed. She saw that there was also a big-bellied wealthy merchant who came up together with her. His body tilted, pretending to be drunk as he pressed his hand to his forehead. After that, his other hand casually threw the waist token that he'd just stolen to that martial artist. His careless and arrogant attitude instead made that martial artist start to guess the identity of this young man in the end. Without the slightest delay, he let Wei Wei pass. The big-bellied rich businessman was still hugging his newly married concubine affectionately. He did not realize that his waist token was gone. He pinched the woman's chin and said, "Wait a moment. I'll show you how many good things General Murong has." "What is it?" The woman also knew how to make people happy. She followed the rich merchant like water. The merchant smiled mysteriously. "We all came from the forest of fantasy. After drinking those things, your little face will definitely become prettier. Then let's go quickly." The woman's eyes lit up. She was really interested. The rich merchant reached out and hugged her. He raised his head and wanted to swagger in. The martial artist stopped him, but the rich merchant didn't care at all. He reached out and touched his waist. Then, his expression suddenly changed. He let go of the woman's hand and shouted anxiously, "Where is my waist token? Why is my waist token gone?" The cultivator glanced at him and didn't give him the slightest bit of face. He snapped his fingers and called for the rich merchant and the woman to be carried out of the building. He didn't need to think to know what would happen to them. This made Hellion Vivian recall the feeling of facing a drug lord in the past. That drug lord also had a bad temper, but was very cunning and suspicious. As long as anyone acted strangely in front of him, he would treat them as an undercover agent and deal with them. Looking at the martial artist's actions, it was not difficult to deduce that Murong Hongtu was a drug lord. However, she still managed to get some useful information. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks and her eyes became deep. He came from the forest of fantasy and drank something that made him young. It must be the spirit beast's blood. When Xiaobai said this, her voice was much colder. This Murong Hongtu is most likely the culprit who entered the forest of fantasy and killed a large number of spirit beasts. Woman, if it's really him, you must be careful. Not only are his methods sinister, but they are also inhumane. I'm afraid that you can't handle it. Hellion Vivian waved the paper fan in her hand. She looked like a gentleman and communicated with Xiaobai telepathically. "Don't worry, I'm good at disguising myself." Hellion Vivian was right. Apart from the military fire, she was also good at disguising herself. Therefore, when she walked into the room, her face quickly changed into an evil smile. The atmosphere in the room was basically what she had imagined. Murong Hongtu didn't come here to participate in the auction. He just needed a secret place to gather all these people. It was a small gathering. Apart from Murong Hongtu, there were 6 to 7 people in the room. There were both men and women. They sat on the sandalwood chairs and chatted with each other. They looked very excited. Hellion Vivian had a feeling that she had entered a cult. However, it only took a moment for her lips to curl into a sloppy smile. "I wonder when it will start. I can't wait." Initially, everyone was hesitant when they saw this unfamiliar young man. However, after hearing what Hellion Vivian said, their eyes lit up and they turned to look at Murong Hongtu. Murong Hongtu was still staring at Hellion Vivian. He was in his 40s, but his skin was abnormally pale. Especially his eyes, they were always gloomy and gave people an uncomfortable feeling. However, even under that kind of gaze, Hellion Wei could still sit down like a ruffian. Then she took out a mirror and looked at her face left and right. "I really want to drink that thing and look younger." Murong Hongtu suddenly laughed out loud. "Don't worry. You'll definitely look younger. Not only that, but will also live forever. As long as you—" As he spoke, he signaled the person standing next to him with his eyes. That person then brought a tray to everyone. Hellion Vivian did not understand what it meant at first. When she saw the first white-haired old man put in banknotes, she realized that the other party was collecting money. When the tray was brought to her, Hellion Vivian casually threw in 10 banknotes. Each banknote was worth 100,000 yuan. This naturally made Murong Hongtu take a few more glances at her. Hellion Vivian did not seem to notice his gaze. She imitated the expression of the people opposite her, showing desire and greed in her eyes. At this moment, Yun Biluo, who had already prepared everything, walked over gracefully. She heard the 2 people mention Hellion Vivian's name. "The main credit goes to us. This time, I'd like to see how she's going to monopolize it." "However, how did you come up with this idea?" "That's amazing. I got the idea after listening to someone else." I don't know who gave me a note with this idea written on it. Yun Biluo's voice gradually faded away. There was a faint smile on her face. It was not very clear, but it was obvious. She did not do anything. She just suggested the idea. After all, one person had to make the decision when it came to teamwork. We're all women. If there's anyone to blame, it's my own fault. I have a toad face and can only do peripheral work. I can't use the beauty trap. Chapter 336. Yun Biluo put down her veil and walked forward with a faint smile on her face. She stopped at the corridor. Your waist tag. The guard stopped her. Yun Biluo looked at the guard with her beautiful eyes. She bowed and spoke in a gentle voice. The guard was intoxicated by her words. He glanced at Yun Biluo and said, "Wait here, I'll go in and report." "Thank you." Yun Biluo retracted her gaze and the smile on her face deepened. In the room on the second floor. "General." The guard walked in from outside and whispered in Murong Hongtu's ear, "The city lord said that he sent a beauty to you." Hellion Vivian was sitting beside Murong Hongtu. Her fingers paused when she heard the guard's words. The beauty should be Yun Biluo and the rest. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. "Woman, I guess that group of people didn't expect you to enter this room earlier than them. They might even think that you're still keeping watch for them outside." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and did not say anything. She raised her wine cup but did not miss any information. Murong Hongtu smiled when he heard that it was a beauty. However, Hellion Vivian felt that his smile was not that simple. "Sent by the city lord himself?" Murong Hongtu asked. The guard shook his head. "I think it was sent by young Master Han." "Why are you reporting when you're not sure?" Murong Hongtu sneered. "Detain her first and ask her where she came from." The guard lowered his head and answered, "Yes." Hellion Vivian put down the wine cup in her hand and remained expressionless. Yuan Ming narrowed his thin lips. "Woman, it seems that your companions won't be able to carry out their next plan." Hellion Wei did not say anything because Murong Hongtu, who was sitting next to her, was looking in her direction. His gaze reminded her of a cobra lying in the grass for no reason. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised the wineglass in her hand. Only then did Murong Hongtu's gaze become less terrifying. He smiled again. "I saw that you were listening so seriously just now, so I thought you were interested in a beauty. Of course I like beauties, but..." Hellion Vivian paused for a moment, and the tip of her tongue swept across her thin lips. "I want to drink what the general is talking about as soon as possible." Murong Hongtu seemed to be very satisfied with Hellion Vivian's answer and laughed out loud again. Then, he put away his expression and gently patted his right hand with his left hand. "Bring it up." Yuan Ming, whose nerves had been stretched taut, immediately let out a sigh of relief. "That was close. I thought he had discovered something. He is very scary." This was Little White's voice. Yuan Ming glanced sideways at Hellion Vivian, only to see that there wasn't a single ripple of emotion on her face. Instead, her lips curled into a devilish smile. Hellion Vivian took a sip of wine. Seeing that the people in front of her had stood up, she also supported herself on the round table and slowly raised her legs. "You will see something more ferocious in a while, but don't think too much about it. You know that you have to sacrifice something in order to stay young forever," Murong Hongtu said as he guided everyone to look into the room. Hellion Vivian walked over and looked at the ceiling. She had goosebumps all over her body. Some people even covered their mouths with an ugly expression. Murong Hongtu glanced at that person. That person finally managed to control his emotions. However, the scene in front of them was indeed a little too much. There were two small corpses hanging on the ceiling. The corpses seemed to have become drainage pipes that acted as a link between the two. Drops of blood flowed down the wooden beam and onto the trapped spirit beasts. Hellion Vivian felt her stomach churn. She knew that whatever reaction she was making now was the right one. If she was too calm, it would seem more fake. Murong Hongtu also knew that it would be difficult for people to get used to such a scene for the first time. He laughed and patted Hellion Vivian's shoulder. "You'll get used to it after seeing it a few more times. Think about the benefits of drinking it." Hellion Vivian gave Murong Hongtu a smile. Murong Hongtu walked past her and strolled to the spirit beast. Like a barbarian eating raw meat, he opened the spirit beast's head and drank a mouthful of blood. Hellion Vivian furrowed her brows, but the smile on her face did not fade at all. She looked at the spirit beast in front of her. It seemed to have just died not long ago. Its eyes were closed and its mouth was half open. Its head and body were dry and shriveled. Its limbs were as thin as reeds. It was indescribably horrifying. After Murong Hongtu drank a mouthful of blood, his eyes lit up. It was almost visible to the naked eye. He seemed to have become more energetic. He looked at Hellion Vivian and the others and said with a smile, "This feels good." When the white-haired old man saw this scene, he couldn't hold it in any longer. Although the sight of the two corpses made him tremble a little. Despite that, the elder's pursuit of immortality had driven him a little crazy. He closed his eyes and buried his face in another spirit beast's head. When he looked up, he felt like he was floating in the air, and he felt like he had endless energy in his body. "Great!" Murong Hongtu laughed. "Who's next?" A rich businessman in his 40s had already walked over, but in the end he shook his head. "No, I'll pass. I have children too. What's the harm in trying?" Murong Hongtu was still smiling. However, Hellion Vivian did not miss the gloomy look in his eyes. The rich businessman shook his head. His expression was terrible. "I'll pass." He did not finish the word pass. Then, a swoosh was heard. Murong Hongtu, who was standing in front of him, gave him a hard stab. "You don't even have the guts to do that, and you still want to live forever?" Murong Hongtu pushed the rich businessman away with his finger. The rich businessman twitched on the floor a few times. Murong Hongtu waved his hand at the guards and looked a little impatient. "Take him away. He's really affecting other people's appetite." In the blink of an eye, a person's life was gone. Hellion Vivian realized that the person standing in front of her was inhumane. It seemed that not only did she have to secretly investigate Murong Hongtu's recent whereabouts, but she also had to think of a way to escape. Wei, you can't drink that blood." Little White jumped out and hid its body. There was vigilance in its eyes. "This is not an ordinary spirit beast's blood. They did something to it." Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. "You mean the two children just now?" "That's right." Little White lowered its voice. "Although they hid it well, judging from the layout, it looks like a small sacrificial ceremony." Using children's blood as a sacrificial ceremony, the spirit beast's blood will be tainted with evil energy. Once a person drinks it, they will be unable to stop. So, you can't break the seal. Chapter 337. Hellion Wei lowered her eyes and listened. She quickly started to think of a way to escape in a moment. There were not many people in the room. Those who wanted to be immortal had already hugged the head of the spirit beast and started drinking. They looked like people who had taken drugs, excited and confused. Hellion Vivian followed suit. She knew that she had to make herself move. If she refused directly, Murong Hongtu would definitely kill her like how he killed the rich businessman just now. Of course, he might not be able to defeat her. However, Hellion Vivian did not forget about today's mission. Tu Su Feng only asked them to inquire about Murong Hongtu's latest news because he wanted to keep a low profile so as not to alert the enemy. Therefore, she could not make a move. "Why aren't you drinking?" The old lady who was standing next to Hellion Vivian looked at Hellion Vivian in confusion. Hellion Vivian did not say anything. Murong Hongtu suddenly opened his gloomy eyes and glanced at her coldly. Hellion Vivian smiled. "I have to ask how it tastes first. Besides, it's rare to have such good food. I have to taste it slowly." As she spoke, she looked up and glanced at the guard next to her. "Bring me a wine glass." "Little brother, you're a person who knows how to enjoy life." Murong Hongtu laughed. "Bring me a wine glass too." Hellion Vivian smiled and scooped up the blood with the wine glass. Then she waved her sleeves. "I'll drink first." Murong Hongtu stared at her without blinking. When he saw that her cup was empty and there was blood at the corner of her mouth, he retracted his gaze and called out to the others, "Come on, let's all have a toast." Amidst the jubilation, everyone had a bewitching smile on their faces. Xiao Bai frowned worriedly. Woman, you didn't really drink it, did you? Why would I? Hellion Vivian clung to her sleeves and coughed softly. There was still a taste of blood in her throat. Yuan Ming laughed. Woman, you are really cruel to yourself. In order to stain her thin lips with blood, she had used her inner force to shake her meridians. Only this woman could do such a thing. Hellion Vivian smiled with a jade-like aura. With her left hand pressed down, she talked and laughed with the people beside her while adjusting her aura. However, at this moment, the old woman seemed to have gone crazy. She sniffed left and right and licked the corner of her mouth with the tip of her bloody tongue. She gave people a strange and terrifying feeling. What is that smell on you? Why is it so sweet? Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and smiled. What smell can I have? This room reeks of blood. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Is that so? The old woman's face was full of doubt. She lowered her head and thought for a while. Then, she called the person leaning on the wooden chair next to her. Smell him. Doesn't he smell good? Hearing this, the man looked at Hellion Vivian. Little White stepped back subconsciously. It was worried that some people would notice the existence of the spirit beast after drinking it for the first time. However, Hellion Vivian knew that it was very likely that they would ask about the blood hidden in her sleeve. It does smell good. It smells good. The man's expression was even more intoxicated than the old woman's. He gradually bent down. Hellion Vivian's fingers tightened, but her eyes were as calm as usual. The two of them looked at each other and then walked closer to Hellion Vivian step by step. It does smell good. Murong Hongtu grinned. There was still blood at the corner of his mouth. He turned to look at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian did not move, but she knew what kind of situation she was in. Facing these people who were drooling at her, she felt that these people were not human at all. They were zombies who had lost all their senses except for their sense of smell. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She held her breath in her palm, but there was no panic on her face. Instead, she made people feel that there was nothing wrong with her. You all have a good sense of smell. Murong Hongtu smiled again. He walked past Hellion Vivian again and pulled the rope hanging on the beam. The smell is coming from this guy. He must have contracted a high-level spirit beast. That's why he can smell so good. As he spoke, Murong Hongtu's fingers tightened and a swoosh was heard. A man in white and green fell down. His body was still tied with an iron chain. The iron chain was specially used to tie up spirit beasts. It was more than enough to deal with humans. The man's head was half lowered. Both of his hands were tied to the beam. His black hair was scattered around the corners of his eyes, just enough to cover his deep and serene eyes. What was exposed was his chiseled jaw and white, straight nose. It was probably because he was put down that the man slowly raised his head. That kind of arrogance and indifference, even though he appeared in this manner, he still couldn't change his stunning appearance. It's him. Hellion Wei looked in astonishment at the man who, even though he was hung up, still showed a lofty and cold temperament. Her shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed. The situation seemed to be a little out of her control. When she came out, wasn't he still in the academy? How could he be kidnapped in the blink of an eye? Just as Wei was thinking, she saw that Bailey Jiaju had already set his gaze on her body. That sexy thin lips slightly curved upwards, looking a bit more flirtatious than usual, only because of the faintly discernible fragrance and the soaring smell of blood at the tip of her nose. After coming out from the cliff, Baligaju began to investigate the spirit beasts. At that time, he was not very enthusiastic. If it were not for the appearance of magical beasts in the White Academy, he would not have come personally. He wouldn't come in person either. He had already noticed Murong Hongtu's strangeness from the very beginning. However, he didn't like to eliminate his enemy in one move. He wanted to play slowly. Wouldn't that be more fun? Murong Hongtu was the first person who dared to kidnap him. Bailey Jiaju's beautiful peach blossom eyes narrowed and once again fell on Wei's body, his long eyebrows wrinkled. Isn't that your man? Yuan Ming's tone became more and more evil. Why is he tied up? Hellion Vivian gave Yuan Ming a very standard answer. He likes to play role-play. Based on her understanding of His Highness, he must have sent himself to be tied up. Such a wicked hobby. Hellion Vivian shook her head in her heart. She heard Murong Hongtu sneered and said, "This person walked around the door twice and thought he could hide from me. How naive." As he said, he took the sharp knife and smiled strangely. "With such a good talent, the blood must taste good. It can be used as a catalyst for the spirit beasts in your body." Chapter 338. Bailey Jiaju looked at Murong Hongtu and suddenly let out a low laugh. He lifted his chin slightly, the lines of his face were perfect. That kind of innate nobility made him appear cold and graceful even though he appeared in this posture. Murong Hongtu's face became even more twisted when he saw his posture. "You're not afraid of death. Do you know what you're tied up with? There are only 2 Shenming iron chains in the world. If I pinch it gently..." Murong Hongtu did not finish his sentence because he saw the man in front of him lift his left hand. The iron chain was forcibly broken. Broke? How was this possible? Murong Hongtu's eyes widened as he stood rooted to the ground. Beligaju smiled faintly as he rotated his left wrist. His legs were long and straight, his waist was thin, and his chest was wide. They formed a perfect inverted triangle shape. He reached out and brushed the non-existent dust off his clothes. He waved his sleeves and the air shook violently. The remaining iron chains wrapped around his body broke one after another. Murong Hongtu could not say a word at this moment. "What? Why did you stop?" Bailey Jiaju's ink-like long hair floated to the ground. His ink-like pupils emitted a demonic and dazzling light, carrying a noble aura that was hard to ignore. He slowly walked toward Murong Hongtu. His black robe wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold, murderous aura. When he walked to Murong Hongtu's side, his appearance changed. He still had that handsome face, but his expression was sinister and vicious. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Murong Hongtu squinted his eyes and threw the 3 knives in his hand at Beligaju. Beligaju's body swayed. No one saw how he moved, but when Murong Hongtu realized what was going on, the 3 knives were already in Beligaju's hands and were thrown to the ground like scrap iron. Those were not ordinary knives. Not only did it have martial chi, but it was also made for him by his master. It wouldn't be a problem for him to kill the sea dragon race. This kind of martial cultivator was actually blocked by a single move? "You? Who the hell are you?" Murong Hongtu trembled as his fingers curled up. He instinctively wanted to run away. Beligaju smiled coldly and slowly reached out his hand. With a loud clang, Murong Hongtu was sent flying into the corner of the wall. A large amount of dust fell from the wall. He straightened his body, his neck was crooked, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. The private room was in a complete mess. Except for Helly and Vivian, no one could move or speak. Only then did they realize that from the very beginning, Beligaju had created a huge barrier. Everyone who was within the barrier had nowhere to run. "Fire Qilin, your contracted divine beast is a fire Qilin." Murong Hongtu looked at the faintly discernible divine beast's shadow behind the man. He was so regretful that even his intestines turned green. He never thought that this divine beast with a sweet smell would be a fire Qilin. That was strange. If it was a fire Qilin, he would have sensed the danger from it from the very beginning. The fire Qilin laughed evilly. "Tisk tisitif. You just casually covered your breath and I treated you like a little white rabbit." At this moment, Murong Hongtu finally understood that everything was a trap. A trap waiting for him to fall into the trap. However, these stupid humans. Did they really think that they could deal with him like this? Haha, this was simply wishful thinking. Murong Hongtu glanced at Beligaju and stuck out his tongue. He licked his thin lips and laughed eerily like a baby. "The fire Qilin could only deal with me when I was demonized when I was with that person." You're just a barbarian tamed by humans. There was a path to heaven, but you didn't want to take it. Demonized? Hellion Wei furrowed her brows. As soon as she looked up, she saw a translucent shadow floating above Murong Hongtu's head. The shadow's appearance was distorted, like a dead baby. Its black nails were buried in Murong Hongtu's hair. It was inexplicably scary. "Woman, be careful. This Murong Hongtu is no longer a human," Yuan Ming suddenly said. It was very rare to see such a serious expression. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She didn't have time to ask how Murong Hongtu became like this, because she could clearly feel that the surrounding atmosphere had changed. When she turned around, she finally understood why the atmosphere had changed. Those people who were sniffing around her just now had obviously lost their minds. They walked toward her and Bailey Jiaju with dull expressions on their faces. If those people just looked like zombies, then they were now real ghosts. Just by looking at those blood-red eyes, it was obvious that it was because they had just drunk the blood of the divine beast. "Woman, don't be bitten by them." Yuan Ming directly revealed his figure. The group of people paused and bared their teeth. They seemed to be afraid of Yuan Ming's existence. Some of them didn't dare to get close. Then, they looked at Beligaju with greedy eyes. Bailey Jiaju stood in front of Murong Hongtu with a murderous aura all over his body. His whole body exuded an indescribable coldness and cruelty. His eyes were calm as he watched the scene, his long eyebrows slightly furrowed. "Woman, quickly think of a way. I haven't fully recovered yet. They will only be afraid of me for a while. After a while, I will have to return to the fantasy space." Yuan Ming's forehead was full of sweat. "So, quickly. So there is one more." Murong Hongtu let out a sinister laugh. His dark red eyes looked at Hellion Wei Wei and said, "I thought you drank the blood just now. Since you don't want to drink it, then you can just wait to be sucked dry. The devil's emissary behind you won't be able to hold on for long. Besides, what can such a small amount of magic do to me?" Sure enough, just like what Master said, you humans are always so full of yourselves. You're so stupid that you really believe in immortality. Ha! Master? In other words, there was a mastermind behind Murong Hongtu? Hellion Wei Wei gradually understood something in her heart. Then, she raised her eyebrows and used a provocative tone in her voice. "Since your master is so powerful, why doesn't he even dare to show his face? He's clearly a coward. You're not allowed to slander my master." The baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head screamed. His sharp voice sounded like a cat crying in the dark. "Master, he's the most gentle and intelligent person in the world. His jade-like temperament is as beautiful as his soul. He's not someone you filthy humans can compare to." Chapter 339. As Murong Hongtu spoke, he touched the dead spirit beasts again. "Just a little more, and I can complete the task given by my master and destroy the peaceful aura here." "Ha, who's the one who wants to kill you too?" The blue eyes of the baby on top of his head glowed faintly and suddenly stared at Beligaju. "I can feel the endless evil aura on your body. If I have your soul, it will definitely be twice the work with half the result." Bailey Jiaju's beautiful peach blossom eyes narrowed. He still hadn't moved when the fire Qilin behind him suddenly blocked in front of him. Its fiery red fur was exceptionally beautiful and hard. "If I were you, I wouldn't have any ideas about my master. Fire Qilin, I don't want to fight with you head-on. Are you sure you want to continue staying here? This Qi will also drive you crazy." The baby laughed loudly again. The fire Qilin clenched its claws. It didn't like this room, but it couldn't explain why it didn't like it. It was only when Bailey Jiaju mentioned that he wanted to destroy the peaceful Qi here that it suddenly realized something. It looked at the fog that was overflowing from the roof and turned to Bailey Jiaju, saying, "Master, you can't stay here. The Qi here would directly affect its master who was already missing a soul. They must leave this place as soon as possible." Following the fire Qilin's words, Hellion Vivian saw something black running out from the corner of the wall. "It's a rat," Xiaobai said in a deep voice. "Wei Wei, you must stop him. Once the auspicious aura here is destroyed, the White Academy will be affected as well." Hellion Vivian's eyes slowly darkened at this moment. Her small face became colder and colder. She didn't know why, but a bad premonition rose in her heart. Those rats ran back and forth in the room like flies that had lost their direction. After running a few steps, they fell in the corner of the wall. Waves of fishy smell emitted from their bodies, spraying everywhere. When those people saw this, not only were they not afraid, they were even more excited. Helly Vivian felt more and more that the people standing in front of her could no longer be considered as human beings. Her gaze turned colder. Murong Hongtu sized up the two people in front of him. In the end, he did not choose to attack Beligaju, who had the fire Qilin to protect himself. Instead, he set his blue eyes on Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian had just narrowed her eyes when she realized that the baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head had suddenly disappeared. Hellion Vivian paused and immediately turned her head around. She saw the baby sticking close to her back. Its black claws were extended as if it wanted to bury itself in her body. Hellion Vivian immediately slashed with the dagger in her hand. The baby didn't even seem to feel the pain as he extended his claws even further. In a flash, Beligaju moved. When he reached out to pull Hellion Vivian over, his arm was viciously scratched by the black claws. His ivory-white sleeve was cut open and bright red blood immediately flowed out. Yuan Ming's face was so pale that only a faint image could be seen. Oh no, whoever the abandoned baby demonic beast grabs will go crazy. If we don't find a way to break its great demonic curse soon, your man might follow suit and bite. When Hellion Vivian heard this, her calm, thin lips tightly pursed. She had no other good points. She was protective of her own people. When she saw that Beligaju's arm was bleeding, her usually indolent little face revealed a strong murderous intent. Murong Hongtu was very disapproving. You've been blocked. I originally wanted to offer your souls to my master. Since you're so disobedient, you can go down and join them. Following Murong Hongtu's words, small expressionless faces suddenly appeared on the roof beam. It turned out that the entire house was hiding corpses. They were all half-grown little people floating in midair. The resentment was getting thicker and thicker, gradually covering the roof beam. Wisps of black fog began to linger and condensed into a whirlpool, as if it was going to suck everyone in. They were like puppets that were controlled by a wireless string. Their fingers stretched out and swayed back and forth one after another. Ferocious, lustful, murderous, and indulgent, they tried to grab hold of anything to climb up or pull people down into the dark underworld. Hellion Wei didn't know why, but an image appeared in her mind. It was as if she had seen this scene somewhere before. The sense of familiarity made her almost subconsciously cut her finger with the blade. Her blood dripped onto the ground, but she was unmoved. Her eyes widened as she chanted the spell, "May I end the future tribulation. I should be responsible for the suffering of all living things. I set up a wide range of conveniences so that you can be free. Let all have feelings. The root of goodness is not corrupted. The foot of God is unhindered, like the void. Eliminate all habits of confusion, like the scorching sun dispelling light ice. Listen to my command, unsheathe and slay evil." In an instant, the air around Hellion Vivian seemed to have a current of air. It rapidly gathered from all directions, forming a shape that resembled the 8 trigrams formation behind her. It also looked like an ancient spell that was formed by many complex scriptures. It did not look very real. However, this alone was enough to make the expression of the baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head change. That was the 8 trigrams exorcism formation. The people of the exorcising tribe should have all died long ago. This woman, how could she? As Murong Hongtu's eyes widened, Hellion Vivian waved her hand slightly and uttered the last sentence. "With my life, I command the winds and clouds of the world." The 5 elements 8 trigrams formation behind her was like a tumbling net that suddenly covered Murong Hongtu. Then, it fiercely tightened. The whirlpool seemed to be penetrated by some kind of force. The black fog quickly dissipated, and the expressionless little face gradually twisted and peeled off. A tearing sound was heard. His sleeves were torn apart. In the blink of an eye, all the black fog was sealed back into the beam. The baby looked at the room that he had painstakingly set up for so long and screamed unwillingly. He rushed over and wanted to bite Beligaju, who was closest to him. However, before he could touch the man's sleeves, he was stopped in midair by an invisible force. Only then did the baby realize that the man's eyes were not the usual black. They were black that was mixed with golden light. The feeling of being burned came from the corner of his mouth. The baby's eyes widened in an instant. He looked at Beligaju's eyes and shook back and forth. This man could actually release martial chi after his arm was grabbed by the baby. But why was that? The baby knew that he was about to be burned. That was why he could not understand. Other than his master, no one could deal with him when he was demonized, unless... Chapter 340. The baby did not continue to think about it. It was not for any other reason but because before it could react, it had been burned into a puddle of black water. When the black water splashed onto the ground, a sizzling sound was heard. The resentment completely disappeared, and the room finally regained its tranquility. The people lying on the ground pressed their foreheads, as if they didn't know what had happened at all. Their heads swayed back and forth, and when they saw the dead rats beside them, their faces instantly turned pale, and they immediately stood up. However, before they could take a step, they were surrounded in the middle of the room by a group of royal shadow guards who had barged in. Hellion Vivian then realized that His Highness did not barge into the campsite alone but had already set up an ambush. Take all of them away. Beligaju glanced at Murong Hongtu, who was cowering in the corner. He spoke casually. The dim light in the room seemed to accentuate his extraordinary identity and reflected his noble temperament. Tell the public that General Murong is an unscrupulous person who accepts bribes. The shadow guards were very efficient and secretive. They did not leave behind any clues and restored the room to its original state in a short while. The guards inside and outside the room were silently replaced by Beligaju's men, so even the organizer of the auction did not know what had happened here. In addition, there was a wizardry barrier set up in this room. Even if there was a commotion inside, the people outside would not hear anything. Previously, when Yun Biluo was taken away, the rest of the people had also evacuated from their original positions, so they did not see the scene of the shadow guards. Instead, they were still thinking of ways to get Yun Biluo to escape without a change in her expression. However, at this moment, Hellion Vivian, who they thought was chased out of the room, had already gotten all the information she wanted. However, this news was not good news, especially when it was facing a morgue. It sent chills down one's spine. Although the baby was gone, it was still uncomfortable to stay in such a room. However, His Highness was not affected at all. Not only was he not affected, but he even set up a wizardry barrier again after the shadow guards left and pressed her against the wooden door. The flickering light shone on his chiseled facial features, making him look ambiguous. Compared to his handsome face, his eyes were even more beautiful. They were like amber gems, extremely beautiful. Hellion Vivian sighed softly. She could smell the unique scent of the man as she breathed. The peach blossom eyes that were supposed to be as cold as ice were now filled with danger. When their eyes met, Hellion Vivian suddenly remembered the kiss she had on Beligaju's forehead before she left. She glanced at the man and felt a little embarrassed. She wanted to shake her head to avoid the other party. Who would have thought that with only a distance of 5 centimeters, Bailey Jiaju would place his arm behind her back. His body was slanted, and he leaned his head close to her ear. He said in a low voice, "Who gave you the courage to even kiss me?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to speak, her lips were covered by someone. Beligaju pinned her down with an amazing strength, not allowing her to break free at all. An irresistible gaze, action, breath, rushed toward her. Hellion Vivian wanted to turn her head to avoid the other party's aggressive approach, but in an instant, a hand clasped the back of her head forcefully. Therefore, the contact was deeper, exchanging breaths with each other. Her tongue that was being sucked tried to dodge, but it felt more like a response. Beligaju's eyes darkened. As he sucked on Hellion Vivian's lips, he loosened his grip on her wrist. His large hand gradually slid down and reached under her clothes. Hellion Vivian suddenly trembled. The cold touch made it impossible for her to hold on to anything. She could only pant slightly and try to push him away. It wasn't that she couldn't hear the sound outside, but because she could hear it, Hellion Vivian felt her whole body tremble inexplicably. However, Bailey Jiaju's hand became even more aggressive as it moved upwards. His fingers needed the softness that he loved so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. Hellion Vivian's body couldn't help but bounce, as if every nerve ending had been electrified. Does it feel good? Beligaju held half of her softness with one hand, but his lips didn't let go of her at all. He kept sucking and kissing her neck, making her feel as if she was going to go numb. Hellion Vivian was like a cooked shrimp. Even if she resisted with all her might, she couldn't escape from Beligaju's hands except for her instinctive shaking. Do you want to feel more comfortable? Beligaju's whisper echoed in Hellion Vivian's ears like a curse. Hellion Vivian didn't understand what was going on with her body. It was probably because she had already dual cultivated, so her resistance to this was extremely low. Her fingers tried to push him away, but her body instinctively craved for further comfort. You're not going to say it? Beligaju's deep eyes flashed. He stopped what he was doing and lowered his head. With a hoarse voice, he bit her softness through her clothes. You can't do this, don't do this. Hellion Weiwei's legs were trembling, and her long hair was messy. She leaned her forehead against Beligaju's shoulder. She bit her thin lips slightly, and there was a fatal weakness in the corner of her eyes. You're so stubborn. Beligaju opened his mouth and sucked on Hellion Vivian's earlobe. His handsome face carried a devilish charm. Do you know that when you wear men's clothes, I want to press you under me and ruthlessly destroy you? Along with the kiss, Beligaju's words were like sounds that directly hit the brain, making Hellion Vivian's already numb softness even more unlike her own. She couldn't help but straighten her neck. Because the other party's strength was getting stronger and stronger, that kind of forceful but gentle kneading made her heart stop beating. When she was drugged, she only felt that Beligaju's entire body was cold. If he pounced on her, it would definitely reduce her heat. As for the other feelings, she didn't remember clearly. She only remembered that he made her sit on his waist and thoroughly penetrated that part. At that time, she was infatuated and felt comfortable. But she still didn't taste the specifics. When she woke up the next day, she only felt pain. This man, when doing this kind of thing, wasn't indifferent at all. Not only was he not indifferent, he was even a little charming. She didn't know how he learned this experience. Evildoer, he was indeed an evildoer. Hellion Vivian knew that she was not his opponent, so she simply relaxed her body. If I were His Highness, I definitely wouldn't choose this kind of room to coerce and lure prey. Chapter 341. Beligaju stopped what he was doing and looked at her with interest. Then he lifted her up and slid his fingers across her long legs, making her wrap her arms around his waist in that position. His thin lips pressed against hers, and his voice was a little naughty. You'll want to feel more in a room like this, won't you? That tone was like a cat playing with a mouse. He was not in a hurry to kill the prey, but only nibbled at it bit by bit, looking for the best position to bite. However, it was hard for Hellion Weiwei to ignore the heat that was pressing against her. Just like that, he rubbed the softness of her legs with his fingers through her clothes, and there was a seductive sexiness in his eyes. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips and wanted to push his hand away, but she was a little sensitive because of his heat. Open your mouth. She suddenly heard Bailey Jiaju's words. His tone was cold and commanding. He didn't know that his low and magnetic voice, which was like a musical instrument, could attract the hearts of many women with his low murmur. He had never paid attention to it before. He also didn't know that there was a hint of provocation hidden in the cold and elegant languor on his body. Hellion Vivian paused for a moment when she felt a tingling sensation in her ears. Before she could react, her chin was lifted and Beligaju's lips covered hers again. The force pressing on her lips was neither light nor heavy, it was warm. Then a breath rushed in. Her breath was filled with the smell of Bailey Jiaju's body. The faint smell of blood and sandalwood mixed together, as if it was cold yet strong. Being hugged by Beligaju like this, Hellion Vivian could only see darkness. Her heart was beating so fast that she almost could not bear it. Beligaju could not see Hellion Vivian's expression, but he could feel her trembling and panting. It was as if her entire body was being controlled by her own hands. She could not escape, and her weak struggles were of no use at all. It should be like this. Beligaju's lips curved up. He thought that after getting it he would gradually feel bored. But for some reason, this made him feel particularly fresh and exciting. It was different from everything he had done before. He tried to bite her harder. As expected, Hellion Vivian let out an unbearable moan. Beligaju's body trembled as an electric current flowed through his body. His eyes gradually blurred as the blood in his body began to boil. This gave Beligaju the urge to lick the other party clean. In the past, he would think that his prey was dirty, but now he only wanted to cover this disobedient person with his aura, or make a mark on the other party's neck. All of Hellion Wei's senses were focused on her neck. That kind of continuous nibbling caused her whole body to heat up a little. What a cute reaction. Beligaju held onto Hellion Vivian's waist. His black eyes flickered with a hint of darkness. For the first time, the excitement brought about by absolute control made Beligaju have the urge to lose control and destroy. Yes, he wanted to hurt her, and even make her cry. Thinking of this, Beligaju stopped in time and pushed Hellion Vivian out. He closed his eyes and suppressed the bloodthirsty desire that arose from that thought. He vaguely had the urge to tear something to shreds. Fire Qilin was originally in the celestial boundary space, adjusting the influence brought about by the resentment of Yin Qi just now, but suddenly felt the unstable martial qi flowing in Bailey Jiaju's body, immediately showed its figure, and called out worriedly, "Master." Beligaju's eyes were calm, but those eyes were tainted with a faint demonic aura. Fire Qilin's claws paused. It thought in a muddled manner that perhaps today's matter was not entirely a bad thing for its master. Hellion Vivian also felt that something was wrong with Beligaju. She didn't know why, but that cold gaze coupled with the ivory robe made him look somewhat charming. Could it be that he was affected by the resentment just now? Hellion Vivian didn't stop at all. She reached out and grabbed Beligaju's arm. Looking at the bloodstains, she frowned. She directly plucked a handful of strawberries that grew from absorbing spiritual energy from the dimensional space, crushed them, and covered Beligaju's hand. The wound isn't very deep. It shouldn't be infected. Beligaju responded faintly and held her waist. In the darkness, no one could see, but the corner of his mouth raised slightly. Even if it was very subtle and difficult to detect, it was still a smile. It was different from the smile he had when he killed someone just now. In fact, the wound on his arm could be removed as long as he used his martial qi. But he realized that the anxious look on her face made people want to take another look. Therefore, he decided to leave the wound behind. When he saw the anger and anxiety on Hellion Vivian's face when she saw that he was injured, that kind of subtle concern and nervousness filled his heart with an indescribable feeling. It was as if he was standing under the sun and the sun was shining down. From his body to the bottom of his heart, every part of him that was numb had come alive, causing his lips to unconsciously curve into an arc, tearing her thoughts apart. It was better to suppress it a little more. He viewed human life as a plaything and could sit and watch anyone die. But when it came to Hellion Vivian, he just wanted to take something to lock her up so that she could only see him. It was still not enough. Such a wonderful feeling. If he didn't monopolize it, he would always feel unsatisfied. When did this feeling of not being able to eat her fill start? When she reached out and lifted his chin for the first time and laughed lightly. All he wanted was to press her under his body and do whatever he wanted to her, but it didn't matter. He had time to slowly spend with her. He didn't miss those subtle physical reactions of hers. She couldn't escape. One day, he would be able to hear her cry for mercy under him. The more Beligaju thought about it, the bigger a certain part of him bulged. Even his breath carried a scorching heat, but his body didn't move at all. But that pair of eyes that could consign people to eternal damnation stared unblinkingly at Hellion Vivian, from her slightly red neck to her heaving chest. Hellion Vivian didn't know why, but she suddenly felt an unknown numbness in her tailbone. If it wasn't for her strong mental fortitude, she would definitely have let go of his hand and softened in his arms. Even her fingers that were bandaging were trembling. She didn't understand what was going on. It was all a certain highness's fault for looking at her so presumptuously. It was as if he was doing something to her. Moi, Beligaju, It's indeed a feast for the eyes. Hellion Vivian was very happy. You finally realized my beauty? Beligaju slowly raised his eyebrows. I was talking about myself. Hellion Vivian. Chapter 342. It's done. Hellion Vivian retracted her hand and distanced herself from Beligaju. In Beligaju's eyes, this kind of reaction turned into a little playfulness. Wei Wei still hadn't forgotten that she still had proper business to attend to. She immediately called in Shadow, who was outside the door. His Highness is injured. The wound needs to be disinfected. Watch him carefully. Don't let him bathe at night. Shadow was originally listening quietly, but when he heard the last sentence, his expression became a little twisted. Don't let Master bathe, it shouldn't be possible. Master had to bathe 3 times a day. He couldn't tolerate even a little bit of stickiness on his body. Hellion Vivian also saw Shadow's dilemma and changed her mind. If he really wants to bathe, find someone to help him bathe. Then don't let His Highness bathe. Whoever dared to touch His Highness could chop off that person's hand. Last time, because of Miss Yun, more than half of the shadow guards were punished by His Highness to face the wall for 3 days. This time, if he casually agreed to help His Highness bathe, their heads would be directly separated from their bodies. It's just that what Shadow didn't expect was that at this time, Bailey Jiaju unexpectedly opened his mouth. He leisurely said, "When you come back, you can help me bathe." Is it good to always trouble Shadow and the others? Shadow felt that there was something wrong with his ears. Trouble? This was the first time he heard this word from His Highness. In the past, when His Highness asked the retired emperor to do something, he never used the words troubled even once. Every time, it was so cold that the retired emperor wanted to scratch the wall and always scolded His Highness for being an unfilial grandson. But now, Shadow didn't know whether to be surprised that His Highness suddenly understood humility or to be surprised that His Highness was willing to let others help him bathe. The fire Qilin actually understood its master's thoughts. In the fantasy space, it licked its incomparably handsome claws and smiled evilly. Master, the black water in your stomach is really getting more and more. The last time you came to White Academy, you could obviously ride a horse, but you still insisted on sitting in a carriage. It's obvious that you wanted to bully people. This time Beligaju didn't deny his thoughts. He curled his thin lips and looked at the fire Qilin from head to toe. If those little spirit beasts know that their Qilin boss has such dirty thoughts, I guess you won't be able to keep your position. Fire Qilin. Wait a minute, who is the dirty one? It was merely a qualified ancient divine beast that had seen through its master's thoughts. Based on its master's bad taste, he definitely wanted to do something to her when he was bathing at night. However, Beligaju had a special ability. Every time he spoke in a low voice, it was easy for people to feel that if they didn't follow his instructions, they would be insensible. Hellion Vivian paused. After all, Beligaju was injured because of her. Speaking of which, she didn't know why. His Highness seemed to get hurt very easily when he was with her. However, it was also thanks to this man's intervention that the cleanup work was carried out more smoothly later on. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian raised her head and smiled faintly. All right, I'll help His Highness bathe. See you at the White Academy later. As she spoke, Hellion Wei Wei strolled out of the room. In the quiet room, the fire Qilin put away its playful thoughts and spoke in a deep voice. Master, did you see that? That 8 trigrams exorcism diagram just now. Beligaju stood up and turned sideways to adjust his collar. His elegant posture brought out a devilish handsomeness. The fire Qilin lowered its eyes slightly. Logically speaking, the exorcist tribe should have been exterminated long ago. Back then, when its master's soul was still intact, the people of their tribe had thought of all sorts of ways to seal its master into the netherworld. However, its master had never taken them seriously. Only now, Hellion Vivian actually used an exorcism spell. What if one day she finds out about Master's true identity? Hearing this, Beligaju's fingers paused in the middle of unbuttoning his outer robe. The corners of his mouth curled up, but his eyes were cold. Then don't let her find out. The fire Qilin opened its mouth but did not say anything in the end. It quietly lowered its head and said, yes. However, there was an indescribable worry in its heart. At this moment, Hellion Vivian had already walked to the entrance of the auction house. After turning left and right, she found the little seventh prince. The little one was holding a meat bun and eating happily. If it was not for the red-eyed, green-haired demonic beast under his feet, probably no one would have noticed what had happened here. Because the little one was standing in a hidden place and because the auction house was always bustling with noise and excitement, no one had noticed this side. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked at the demonic beast that was gasping for breath after being beaten up by the little one. Where did this thing come from? I don't know either. The little one was very angry when he talked about this matter. But the only thing I'm sure of is that it came to snatch my meat bun. I had just taken a bite when it pounced on me from behind. It's so disgusting. Hellion Wei Wei knew that she would not be able to get anything out of a foodie, but Little Seven's combat skills were top-notch. She glanced at the magical beast on the ground again, and the corner of Hellion Wei Wei's mouth curled up. Your third brother is upstairs. The mission is over. Go and look for him first, but don't tell anyone about the appearance of the magical beast. I know. The little one put on a stern face and said, those people thought that third sister-in-law would definitely lose, so they were all running behind that Yun. They didn't even notice the appearance of the demonic beast. How stupid. Hellion Vivian patted his head. Even if our little senior brother is a foodie, he is a smart foodie. Little Baldhead's face was cold and stern. He seemed to be embarrassed. He coughed softly and pretended to be serious. Third sister-in-law, you should keep this to yourself. Don't tell anyone. I am afraid that if others know, I will have more suitors. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Little Seven, how old are you? You already know how to have suitors. Third sister-in-law, go ahead. Little Baldhead licked his fingers and put on a serious face. I am going to find third brother and ask him what he wants to eat later. Hellion Vivian looked at the little one who was wobbling as he walked. His two short legs were swinging back and forth, and he was muttering about all kinds of food. She put her hand on her forehead and smiled. He was still a foodie. However, this Murong Hongtu was more complicated than they thought. The battle spirit forces should not know that Murong Hongtu had been demonized. Moreover, the most important thing was to find out why he wanted to destroy the peaceful atmosphere here. After making arrangements for Little Seven, Hellion Vivian did not stay any longer. She went back to the underground palace as fast as she could to report the completion of the mission. However, Little White and Yuan Ming seemed to be too quiet. Chapter 343. Could it be that he was affected by the resentment just now? Hellion Vivian thought about it and called out, Yuan Xiaoming? Yes. Yuan Ming's deep voice came over. Compared to the usual evil aura, there was a deeper meaning to it. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Are you still feeling unwell? No. Yuan Ming's lips curled up and his figure was faintly discernible. Woman, where did you learn the incantation you chanted at the auction just now? Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks and looked back with indifferent eyes. If I said that I just felt that I had seen a similar incantation before, would you believe me? Yuan Ming stared at her for a while and then smiled evilly. I believe you, but I didn't expect that I would actually make a contract with an exorcist. No wonder those elders call you the Phoenix Girl. The one they call the Phoenix Girl is not me, it's Hellion Jiao. Hellion Vivian shrugged. Yuan Ming's thin lips curled up. Woman, you misunderstood me. What I meant was that the exorcist tribe is indeed powerful. In order to reincarnate, they made the world believe that the Phoenix Girl will rule the world. In fact, the Phoenix Girl mentioned here is the descendant of the exorcist tribe. According to the prophecy in the scripture, the descendant of the exorcist tribe will not be reincarnated easily unless the world is in chaos and the demons are invading. Xiao Bai also opened her mouth and said with cold eyes, now that the Exorcist 8 diagrams has reappeared in the world, it means that someone is trying to destroy the Taiji seal that suppresses the demons, so that the demons and ghosts that are suppressed in the underworld can be completely released. For thousands of years, the reason why humans have been able to live so peacefully is entirely because of the Taiji seal. If the Taiji seal is destroyed, it would be like tearing open a hole in the night sky. The demons would no longer care about the law pact and would go on a killing spree because to them, humans are the most delicious food. Hellion Vivian was good at grasping the key points. You mean that the other party is doing so much, including Murong Hongtu's intention to destroy the Taiji seal? It's very possible. Xiaobai nodded. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. It seems that we have to find the dean first and tell him everything. Whitey retracted its body. Hellion Vivian continued to walk forward with a heavy heart. After entering the underground, the lighting was very poor. She did not know who had lit an oil lamp, but the depths of the tunnel flickered with dim candlelight, making it seem even more eerie. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. She was already walking very lightly, but in this narrow and circuitous passage, she was still so loud. It made people feel very uncomfortable, as if there were other creatures here other than her. However, this was the only way to reach the underground palace. Fortunately, the journey was not long. In the blink of an eye, Hellion Vivian had arrived at the meeting point. However, Yun Biluo and the rest were obviously not back yet. And Tu Sufeng was not here either. Strange, didn't we agree to gather here after the test? I didn't expect you to be the first to come back. Suddenly, a slightly deep voice was heard from behind. Hellion Vivian looked back and saw another tutor strolling over with a book in his hand. He sat on the sandalwood chair, just like Tu Sufeng, and poured tea for both of them. Sit. Hellion Vivian sat down. She knew this meant that there was going to be a long talk. How about them? The tutor raised his eyebrows and asked. Still investigating? Hellion Vivian's voice was very faint. The tutor glanced at her, holding a brush as if he was recording something. Your teamwork awareness needs to be improved. Hellion Vivian knew, but she could not cooperate even if she wanted to. What did you find out? The tutor spoke again. It turned out that he was asking while grading Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian looked at the black spot on his neck. Her eyes paused for a moment, and her mind was in a whirl. However, she casually told him what happened at the auction. However, she would always leave some leeway when she spoke. For example, she did not say a word about her ability and what Xiaobai and the rest told her just now. However, this alone was enough to make the tutor's expression change. We only found out that Murong Hongtu is very likely to be illegally hunting for spiritual objects. I didn't expect him to. It's really shocking. Hellion Vivian brushed her long sleeves across the table, her fingers landing on the cup beside her. The tutor stopped what he was doing and took a sip of water from the cup beside him. It was obvious that he was digesting the news brought by Hellion Vivian. You said that you saw him demonize with your own eyes? The tutor seemed to have thought of something and suddenly raised his eyes. Hellion Wei was also drinking tea. When she heard his question, she nodded and said, but I don't think it's appropriate to use the word demonized to describe it. Murong Hongtu must have been possessed by something. The tutor sitting opposite her heard this, and his attitude turned cold. He glared at her. Possessed? Do you know what you're saying? You're a new member of the Battle Spirit Forces. How do you expect me to respond to such superstitious words? But this is the truth. Hellion Vivian calmly crossed her legs slightly, as if she was looking for a suitable excuse. To be honest, I don't believe that there is such a thing as possession in this world. But after seeing the black shadow above Murong Hongtu's head, I can't help but believe that he is indeed controlled by something. Actually, if there is such a thing as possession, why can't there be such a thing as possession? The tutor squinted his eyes, as if he was thinking about Hellion Vivian's words. According to what you said, he was no longer Murong Hongtu from the beginning? It's very possible. Hellion Vivian ran her fingers across the teacup. Moreover, the master that he mentioned is worth investigating. Besides, what Murong Hongtu did this time is illegal hunting for spiritual objects. I suspect that there is a possibility that someone who did the same thing as him could be possessed. The tutor frowned. Why do you think so? Hellion Vivian picked up the teacup and took a sip. It's very simple. Because the master that he mentioned needs a lot of bodies. But she still didn't know how Murong Hongtu was possessed. I didn't expect you to be so smart. The tutor smiled and stood up. He gestured with the teacup. Tu Su Feng really has a unique insight. Now it seems that he made the right choice. You won this test. Hellion Vivian smiled and accepted the compliment. She took another sip of tea and said, "Thank you." However, she didn't see that when she lowered her head to drink tea, the tutor's strange and gloomy gaze. Chapter 344. The night was getting darker and darker. At this moment, Yun Biluo, who was outside the academy, had also noticed the problem. After killing the guards with her bare hands, she found out that Murong Hongta had been taken away by the royal family. What should we do? We haven't completed our mission yet. The other two young masters were sweating profusely. They had run back and forth, but they didn't have the slightest bit of harvest. Yun Biluo thought about it and said, "We don't have much time left. We didn't expect the royal family to intervene this time. I'm sure the dean didn't expect this as well. Since things have come to this, we can only go back first." Go back? We didn't find anything. How are we going to explain it when we go back? Yun Biluo glanced at the two men. Who said we didn't find anything? Murong Hongtu didn't come here to participate in the auction. He came here to meet people. All the people he met were rich and noble merchants. The way they met was so secretive. He must be trying to hide something. As long as we tell the higher-ups, we'll have completed our mission. Why didn't I think of this? The young master's eyes lit up. Miss Yun, you're so thoughtful. Only the three of us have gotten the news. As for the others, let's not talk about them. Not to mention what Hellion Vivian could do. She definitely didn't get any news. She'll be the last one in the end. Yun Biluo smiled gently. She looked at the darkening night and said slowly, "Since everyone thinks this is a good idea, let's go back. It's almost time." The two men naturally agreed. However, they did not know that the last one in their hearts had already arrived at the underground palace. However, the situation was a little bad. The candlelight in the middle of the palace swayed back and forth. The person sitting across from Hellion Wei Wei put down his cup. Seeing that Hellion Wei Wei's cup was empty, the corners of his mouth curled up into a sinister smile. That kind of smile could easily send chills down people's backs. Hellion Wei Wei furrowed her eyebrows and still didn't move. That person said, "However, even if you win, you won't be alive to enjoy it." As soon as that person finished speaking, Hellion Vivian's fingers shook and her neck went limp. The water in the cup spilled out. Seeing this, the man slowly put down the teacup in his hand. "Are you feeling cold and dizzy? Enjoy the poison in this tea." After saying that, the man wanted to pack up and leave. "Are you sure you can walk?" To his surprise, Hellion Vivian still had the strength to raise her head. Hellion Vivian continued, "Shouldn't you be the one feeling cold and dizzy?" Suddenly, the man narrowed his eyes and clenched his trembling fingers. He glanced at Hellion Vivian, who should have fainted, and subconsciously looked at the teacup on the table. Hellion Vivian chuckled. "You think you can poison me with just a cup of water? You're underestimating me, Hellion Vivian." The man wanted to reach out and pinch Hellion Vivian's neck, but he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his internal organs. This woman, she changed the teacup. Just when did this happen? Why didn't he notice it at all? Hellion Vivian stood up and looked at him casually. "You're good at acting. If it wasn't for the black spot on your neck, I wouldn't have noticed the problem with the 2 cups of water. It was the black spot that made me hesitate. Because Murong Hongtu also had the same black spot on his hand, I guess that everyone who drank the blood of spirit beasts would have a black spot on their body, like a mark. However, is the blood of spirit beasts really so good that even you, a teacher of the battle spirit forces, couldn't resist the temptation?" That person laughed, blood flowing out of his mouth, and his expression became somewhat bewitched. "What do you know? Immortality, that is something that everyone wants. What's more, this blood can give people endless energy. I did this just to make the battle spirit forces stronger. As for you, you've been a good-for-nothing since you were young. You only have eyes for one man, but you've forgotten your grandfather's instructions. Instead of handing the battle spirit forces to such a person, why not let me take over this invincible army? Hellion Vivian laughed and said in a mocking tone, "It sounds great, but in the end, you just want to take over the battle spirit forces? So what? The strong do more work." The man's eyes were red. "I've done so many things for the battle spirit forces. The battle spirit forces' current achievements are all because of me. Who do you think you are?" Hellion Wei Wei's thin lips curled up. "It's all because of you? As far as I know, the reason why the battle spirit forces were able to come through peacefully for so many years was not because of you, but because of the headmaster's dealings with the great families. You just couldn't withstand the pressure, and because of your excessive vanity, you became a spy for the 4 great families. I know that you want to get rid of me, not only because of the 4 great families' orders, but also because you don't want to hand over the management of the battle spirit forces." "That's right." The man put his fingers on the table and sneered. "Your headmaster is indeed capable, but he's too stupidly loyal. Just because the old man saved his life, he wants to return the battle spirit forces to you. Huh? How capable can a little girl be?" Facing that person's questioning, Hellion Wei Wei's expression was still very calm, but the words that came out of her mouth could infuriate people to death. "And you were defeated by this silly little girl that you looked down on. Tell me, how stupid are you in the end?" Sure enough, when the man heard this, his face twisted in anger. Dragging his poison body, he wanted to pounce on Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, and just as she was about to get into a stance, she heard a bang. The man was knocked to the ground by a wooden stick that suddenly flew over. Hellion Wei Wei turned her head and looked over, only to see Tu Feng, who was covered in a murderous aura, wearing a green robe, walking over. His pair of phoenix eyes flickered. "Why are you here?" The man spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Tu Feng in disbelief. He had set a trap and made him go out of the city. When Tu Feng wasn't smiling, he gave off an oppressive aura. "We've been together for so many years. You don't understand me, but I understand you very well. Why do you think I told you that Wei Wei had the military seal? It was just to test you, and you have disappointed me. So, you've been here all along? You've never gone out of the city." The man's eyes shook, as if he suddenly understood something. He was very unwilling. "Tu Feng, you actually set a trap for me." Chapter 345. Tu Feng did not bother with him anymore. He waved his sleeves and ordered his men to take him away. Then he turned around and looked into Hellion Vivian's eyes. He smiled faintly. "I hope you don't blame me for using this method to test your reaction. At the same time, you can catch the spy." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Feng smiled faintly but did not say anything. At that moment, Hellion Vivian only felt that the person in front of her was the smartest person. He was simply amazing. He was indeed His Highness Uncle. This family was not easy to deal with at all. Only little Seven was a little cuter. Tu Feng naturally knew what she was thinking. "I thought you had gotten used to it after being with Aju for so long." "Get used to what? Being tricked?" Hellion Vivian also smiled. Tu Feng glanced at the Xian paper on the table and then changed the data on it. Only then did he say, "Your performance has exceeded my expectations. I indeed wanted you to help me lure out the spy. However, when you were sitting here, I was already prepared to come out. Later, you actually changed your cups? In such a short period of time, you were able to detect that there was something wrong with the other party. Moreover, you were able to quickly deal with it, and later on, you didn't even bat an eyelid. Now, you are more qualified than anyone to be a member of the battle spirit forces." As he spoke, Tu Feng handed over the banknotes in his hand. This time, Hellion Vivian did not ask for the reward. She only looked up at Tu Feng and said in a clear voice, "In the past, I lived a muddle-headed life. No wonder people didn't want me to join the battle spirit forces. But now, I am a member of the battle spirit forces. I should be qualified to ask for help from the battle spirit forces." "Are you begging me?" Tu Feng smiled. Hellion Vivian shook her head. Her eyes were clear like jade and indestructible. I am exercising my right as the successor of the He family. Tu Su Feng looked at the girl standing in front of him, who was neither servile nor overbearing. It was as if he saw the old man who sat in that position and commanded to kill the enemy. He was not anxious and could control the situation. He was stunned for a moment. Then, he curled his lips and said, "What a nice way of saying that I should exercise my rights as the successor of the He family." At this point, Tu Su Feng paused. "In a moment, someone will take you to a place. Although I am in charge of the investigation of the battle spirit forces, other people are in charge of the deployment of the army." "Who are the others?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Su Feng gave her an answer that was not a smile. "Hey family." Hence, that was why the following scene happened. As soon as Hellion Vivian walked into the Hay family's courtyard, she saw the second young master of the Hay family happily jumping over the wall. The two of them merely glanced at each other, causing the manservant behind them to misunderstand. "Young master, how can you not listen to master's words and meet a woman here? It's fine if you meet other people, but now Miss Wei Wei is the third princess consort. You have committed a capital crime." He eyes frowned. "Listen to me first, young master." That manservant decisively interrupted him. "You don't need to explain. I won't believe you. I'm going to tell master now." Without waiting for anyone to react, that manservant ran away and disappeared without a trace. He eyes. "What the fuck is this? Why you here?" He eyes directly jumped down from the wall, not caring about the iron chains tied to his hands. His domineering appearance did not diminish in the slightest. He was only wearing a black nightgown and the slightly open collar was not fastened properly. Under his handsome eyes, the corners of his mouth were curved. His frivolous smile made people feel that he was gentle and at ease. If a woman saw this, she would not be able to reject such a person and such a smile. However, Hellion Vivian also felt wronged. "Actually, I'm here to look for old Master Hay." "Then why didn't you say so just now?" He eyes moved his head closer. "Help me remove the rotten grass on my head first." Hellion Vivian naturally would not refuse. Just as she was about to raise her hand, she saw old Master Hay, who was wearing a brocade robe, walking over from not far away. His face was gloomy, and he was holding a dragon-headed crutch in his hand. There was a little displeasure in his eyes when he looked at Hellion Vivian, but he was still polite. "Third princess consort, what brings you to my humble abode?" Hellion Vivian knew that old Master Hay did not like her. She curled her lips and smiled. "To catch up on the old days." "Catch up on the old days?" Old Master Hay glanced at the moon in the sky. "It's so late. Third princess consort is here to catch up with my grandson. Does the third prince know?" This was to remind Hellion Vivian that she was already married, and her behavior was improper. Hellion Vivian smiled. "He doesn't know. But I'm not here to look for he eyes. I'm here to disturb you, old Master Hay." "Me?" Old Master Hay glanced at the servant beside him, as if blaming him for not reporting the truth. Then he turned back and looked at Hellion Vivian. "Steward Zhang, go and get ready. I'll talk with third princess consort in the study." "Yes." Steward Zhang bowed his head and accepted the order. He eyes wanted to follow him, but he was nailed to the ground by old Master Hay's gaze. "Add another layer of iron chains for the young master." "More?" He eyes' handsome face instantly darkened by more than half. Hellion Vivian smiled without sympathy and followed old Master Hay into the study. Everyone in the Hay family behaved like a noble family. No matter who came, it was the same. Old Man Hay sat in a wooden chair and blew on the tea that was served by a servant. Then he said, "You came to find me so late at night, and the people following you are Tu Su Feng's people. It seems that you are already a member of the battle spirit forces." Hellion Vivian nodded faintly. She held the tea in her hand but did not drink it. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth. Old Master Hay saw that she was so indifferent. He could not help but admire her. "The profound world that you and Zhe opened is not bad. It's okay in the north, but the operation needs to be strengthened." Hellion Vivian did not exaggerate or belittle herself. "Old Master Hay, you are also doing business." You can teach us in the future. We haven't opened the market in the south. Old Master Hay waved his hand. Now it's the world of you young people. Your grandfather and I were like you and Zay. We were always fearless and killed enemies side by side. So eyes and I can only be brothers, not husband and wife. Hellion Vivian followed his words. Old Master Hay was stunned for a moment and laughed. No wonder your grandfather said that you were smart when you were young. Now it seems that it is true. I'm still not smart enough. The light in Wei Wei's eyes dimmed, but seemed to be brewing a lot of emotions. If I was really smart enough, Mother wouldn't have died, and I wouldn't have been schemed against and driven out of the Defense Division's residence. So much so that even the people in the clan wanted to remove my name. Chapter 346. Old Master Hay's hand paused as he drank the tea. His emotions surged and finally turned into a sigh. Girl, it's been hard on you for so many years. A sword that has been sharpened for 10 years. Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and said slowly, sometimes, suffering a little can make people sober. The most she had suffered in her life was slaps. In modern times, her stepmother's disgust would always cause her to be beaten for no reason. No one had ever thought of giving her dates to eat, not to mention listening to her grievances. At that time, she liked to hide in the closet to sleep because she felt that it was the safest place. She knew better than anyone that in this world, one could only rely on one's own hands to create one's own empire. It was the same now. She would take revenge on those she hated. She would not blame those who did not help her. Because no one said that they had to help you. Old Master Hay looked at the pair of eyes that were as firm as water and made a decision. I'll take you to the military camp now. If Hellion Vivian saw him and complained about so many years of suffering, he might not accept her immediately, even if he knew about her current achievements. However, the young girl standing in front of Old Master Hay was neither anxious nor impatient. She was neither lukewarm nor angry, but she had her own unique arrogance. He really felt sorry for such a child. After all, it was not that he had not heard the rumors in the capital all these years. When he heard that his unfilial grandson was getting close to this girl, he was half happy and half worried. Probably everyone in the world thought that he did not like Hellion Vivian's style. He did not like her, but more than that, he was disappointed that she did not live up to his expectations. He had also thought of simply letting his unfilial grandson marry Wei Wei. At least in the Hay family he could protect her. But at that time, the old man said before he died that he wanted to see his only granddaughter become a talent. So he protected this girl from behind many times, but he could not protect her too much. Now, all of this was finally worth it. After that, Old Master Hay took Hellion Vivian to the back of the mountains. In the fog of the night, no one knew how Old Master Hay walked. An extremely secluded valley appeared in front of Hellion Wei Wei. All the animals that passed by the entrance of the valley were scared away by the murderous aura inside. At this time, the unique sound of soldiers training could be faintly heard from the valley. This was where the hidden army of the Hellion clan was hiding. So God was hiding here. No wonder no one could find him. Hellion Vivian looked at the entrance of the valley and raised her eyebrows. This was indeed a good place. However, she didn't expect that as soon as she finished speaking. A soldier's unique sonorous voice rang out, "Halt your steps. This is a restricted area for our army. Unauthorized personnel, please leave quickly. Be careful not to provoke a fatal disaster." "It's me. I've brought the descendant of old General Hellion." Old Master Hay stood with his hands behind his back. There was not a trace of emotion on his face, but his voice was deep and powerful. When the soldiers guarding the entrance of the valley heard Old Man Hay's voice, they immediately appeared and knelt on one knee. "Get up." Old Master Hay took the lead and walked forward. The soldiers replied, "Yes." They followed behind Old Master Hay respectfully. However, when they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a trace of disdain in their eyes. Hellion Vivian turned a deaf ear to the soldiers' stares and walked into the valley. "Woman, this soldier doesn't like you." Yuan Ming's voice was still very charming. Hellion Wei Wei smiled, Her thin lips curved up to reveal a bit of black-bellied flavor. When the two of them entered the valley, they saw many well-built men in plain clothes. They were either practicing alone, in pairs, or in groups. Every one of them was practicing in the school field. It was very lively. Old Master Hayes seemed to be saying something to one of the young generals. That young general was wearing a straight military uniform. There was not a single crease on his clean clothes. Under his black hair was an expressionless, handsome face. His skin was a sexy bronze color. His lips were very thin and the tip of his nose was very high. A pair of black eyes were like crystals, faintly shining like glass. When he heard Old Master Hayes' words, he seemed to look at Helene Vivian. That kind of gaze had a trace of inquiry, but it was so handsome that it was breathtaking. I didn't expect that there would be such a beauty in this group of soldiers who are always fighting and killing. The person who spoke was Yuan Ming. Helene Vivian crossed her arms and smiled faintly. What? You like him? Laozi likes men. Yuan Ming blurted out in a moment of desperation. Helene Vivian snorted. You finally admitted it? Wait a minute. I was wrong. Yuan Ming anxiously wanted to explain. Helene Vivian directly cut off the telepathic communication with him. Yuan Ming could only scratch at the wall in the fantasy space. Little White glanced at him, and that glance contained countless hee-hees. Two people in the distance were talking. Although it was said to be a conversation, in fact, it was only Old Master Hay talking. And that young general did not say a word from beginning to end, nor did he look at Helene Vivian a second time. Helene Vivian was a secret agent, so of course, she knew what this meant. 1. He did not like her. 2. He played a key role in whether she could obtain the hidden army or not. 3. This person must have the same obsession with cleanliness as His Highness. It could be seen from his military uniform that was not stained with a speck of dust. 4. He was very difficult to approach. However, there was one thing that Helene Vivian did not understand, and that was the way he looked at her seemed to be mixed with too many emotions. Did they know each other before? Before Helene Vivian could figure it out, she heard a cold laugh. What right does a piece of trash like you have to be here? Quickly go back and find someone to marry. After you give birth to a child, send it to us for us to raise, and then restore the glory of the Helene family. The person who spoke was standing next to the young general. He was almost 2 meters tall, and his muscles were bulging, giving people a strong sense of oppression. His standard square face was filled with obvious anger. Captain de Xiong is right. Instead of you, you should send a child here. Anyway, you only know how to hang around that Lord Murong. Many of our brothers have died because of you. Do you know that a person like you is not worthy of our lives? Get out of here, you are not welcome here. Waves of resentful insults and chastising voices rose and fell one after another. Helene Vivian stood tall and looked at de Xiong in front of her, and then looked at the eyes of the other soldiers. She was not angry. She also understood how disappointed these people would be when they found out that the person they were supposed to be loyal to was a love-struck fool who only knew how to follow behind a man. Whether I am a piece of trash or not, whether I am worth your lives, we will know after a competition, right? Chapter 347. When Helene Vivian spoke, there wasn't a trace of anger or dissatisfaction in her tone. She lifted her chin slightly, giving off a natural air of indolence. When de Xiong heard that Helene Vivian wanted to compete with him, he was so angry that he laughed instead. Since you want to compete, then I'll help old General Helene teach you a lesson, you good-for-nothing descendant. Compared to de Xiong, Helene Vivian was much more polite. She simply said, please. Her indifference naturally aroused the crowd's dissatisfaction. Captain, don't be polite with her. You must teach her a lesson. As the crowd flew into a rage, it was too late for Old Man Hay to stop them. He looked at the young general beside him and said with a sullen face, don't they know that Helene Vivian is no longer the useless person she used to be? While you were recuperating, the capital had undergone earth-shattering changes. Even if they don't know Qian, You should know that the armament in your hand was personally made by Helly and Vivian. I know. Qi Yan's tone was indifferent. However, I can't convince the crowd. Hearing this, Old Man He frowned. At this moment, Helly, Vivian, and De Xiong had already arrived at a corner of the drill ground. After the two of them stood still, De Xiong pointed to the weapon rack and said, "Go and pick your weapon. I'll give you some of my bare hands." Helly Vivian's mood was not affected by the sneers around her. A trace of an evil smile appeared on her slightly indolent face. "No need. I brought my own weapon. Please give me some pointers. Since you're looking for a lesson, I'll fulfill your wish." De Xiong did not say anything else. His figure flashed, and with an agility that did not match his majestic body, he rushed towards Helly and Vivian. His pair of iron fists created a gust of wind wherever they passed. When Helly and Vivian saw De Xiong rushing towards her, her beautiful eyes gradually narrowed into slits. However, her posture did not change. She still stood there casually. When Da Xiong's big fist appeared in front of Helly and Vivian bent over and dodged it. Then, she threw an uppercut at Da Xiong's chin. De Xiong did not expect that this good-for-nothing descendant would be able to dodge his punch. Just as he was feeling shocked. Sensing the dangerous aura below his head, he hurriedly tilted his head and barely dodged Helly and Vivian's fist. When Helly and Vivian saw that her attack had failed, she bent down and supported herself with one hand. She kicked Da Xiong's face from behind with her right foot. Da Xiong barely dodged Helly and Vivian's fist in surprise. Before he could stabilize himself, he felt a sharp pain in his forehead. Helly and Vivian had kicked him. Helly and Vivian's kick made De Xiong stumble backward. While his mind was in a daze, Helly and Vivian followed closely behind. She leaped high into the air, grabbed De Xiong's head, and hit him hard with her elbow. Bang! De Xiong, who was full of confidence, was hit by Helly and Vivian and fell to the ground. His ears were buzzing, and he could not get up for a long time. All the soldiers were dumbfounded. They looked at De Xiong on the ground with disbelief gradually appearing on their faces. De Xiong shook his head twice and wanted to get up and fight again. At this time, Red Flame, who was in a neat military uniform, walked over. His waist-length black hair fluttered gently in the wind. There was no trace of expression on his cold face. However, he reached out and pressed De Xiong's hand. His voice was calm, but it was oppressive. "If you continue to fight, you will lose." "That's not necessarily true. I only used less than 1/5 of my strength." De Xiong shouted unwillingly. "I saw that she was a woman, so I didn't really use my full strength." Qi Yan glanced at Helly and Wei Wei with an indifferent expression. "You only know that you've used less than 1/5 of your strength, but didn't you notice that she's wearing weights on her feet and hands?" "Weights?" De Xiong seemed to be in disbelief. He deliberately glanced at Helly and Vivian. When his eyes came into contact with her wrists, he could not help but be stunned. Did she really wear weights? This woman actually wore 3 heavy buckles and came to compete with him? Moreover, her speed just now was so fast that it did not seem like she was wearing weights at all. Red Flame's voice was cold, but it sounded especially textured in the middle of the night. Not only that, but she also did not release her martial qi. De Xiong's expression completely froze when he heard this. Wei Wei also didn't conceal her body's martial qi cultivation. Her thin lips slightly curved, one hand spread out, her long sleeves fiercely fluttering. One could only see that the wind surrounding her body seemed to have been manipulated by her, forming a huge current of air lingering on both sides of her body. And she was just like a queen who controlled the wind under heaven. Her long and narrow eyes carried a smile of her own way, unexpectedly giving birth to a breathtaking feeling on that dark face. How can this girl have such strong martial qi? Not only the surrounding soldiers, but even old Master He himself was shocked and a little excited. It seemed that the reinvigorating of the hidden army and taking back the general's residence was just around the corner. De Xiong was the closest to Helly and Vivian, so he could see the clearest. If she had raised her martial qi from the beginning, he would not even have had the chance to make a move, let alone talk about winning or losing. After an uproar, there was an unprecedented silence in the drill ground. Hellion Wei Wei looked at the soldiers in front of her. Her attitude was neither anxious nor impatient. I know that all of you were disappointed by my actions in the past, but those were not my original intentions. I was framed, my meridians were broken, and I lost my martial chi. I was muddle-headed all year round, thinking that I was being pampered and raised, but I didn't know that someone was deliberately putting me on a pedestal. Now I have also changed. Although I can't be gentle, I won't be like before, chasing after someone. Because the only thing I want to do right now is to take back everything that originally belonged to my Hellion family, and this includes your trust. I dare not say that I can make you risk your lives for me like my grandfather, but I promise that even after 100 years, there will be people who will remember our invincible hidden army. Her voice was not loud, but it seemed to penetrate the blood vessels of the people. When the soldiers heard the cause and effect, and saw her strength, they only felt that the blood in their chests was about to surge out. At this moment, they realized they had been waiting all this time. Waiting for the real arrival of the descendant of the He family, undoubtedly, this moment was what they had been waiting for. The soldiers looked up and saw the cold and slender figure under the moonlight. She was not tall, but she gave people the feeling that she had the world in her hands. De Xiong was the first person to provoke Hellion Vivian, but at this moment, he simply knelt down on one knee and said in a deep voice, I, son De Xiong, am willing to follow the young master to death. His words were like a spark that started a prairie fire. The soldiers shouted one after another, echoing throughout the entire valley, we are also willing to follow the young master to death. Hellion Vivian looked at this scene and took a deep breath. She could even feel the coldness in the air. Finally, she had the capital to take back the general's residence. Chapter 348. The last one was Qi Yan. He did not kneel. Instead, he silently raised the flag on the drill ground with one hand and placed it in front of Hellion Wei Wei. He was dressed in a military uniform, and he stood tall and straight. When his eyes met with Hellion Vivian's, they were as deep as the sea and as deep as the night. At that moment, thousands of soldiers behind him cheered excitedly. Hellion Vivian knew that this person had an extraordinary influence in the hidden army. Later, she heard Old Master He talk about his background. Only then did Hellion Vivian know that this person was the first young master of the Qi family who was personally invited to the palace by the emperor. At the age of 17, he had won against all the officials in the virtual hunt. It was no wonder that he had such a presence. Hellion Wei Wei smiled, the corners of her mouth slightly curved. However, she realized that Qi Yan had been looking at her. His gaze was a little unfathomable. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows at him. When Qi Yan brushed past her, he sneered, it seems that you don't remember anything. Wait a minute, what should she remember? Hellion Vivian frowned slightly. What was going on? Old Master He did not hear anything. He patted her shoulder and said in a dignified voice, good job, girl. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and nodded. She seemed to have thought of something and said, I still have something to discuss with Old Master He. Shall we go into the tent? Old Master He nodded. Qi Yan looked back at Hellion Vivian. The three of them sat in the military tent with hot tea in their hands. Hellion Vivian was a person who could not hide things. Looking at Qi Yan's cold and handsome face, she thought for a while and said, young Master Qi, did you have a crush on me before? Old Master He spat out a mouthful of tea and coughed heavily. Qi Yan's handsome face was already half black. Is that what you want to say? Of course not. Hellion Vivian observed his expression. I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding between us. Scarlet Flame's smile grew colder. What misunderstanding could there be between us? Hellion Vivian curls his thin lips and smiles. That's good. Scarlet Flame looked at her and found it interesting. Then, he said to Old Man He, she doesn't even have her memories. Old Master He also frowned. Hellion Vivian also knew that there were loopholes in her memory. On the day I sank into the lake, I hit my head. There are some things that I remember and some that I have forgotten. Is that so? Scarlet Flame's long and narrow eyes glanced in her direction. Hellion Vivian nodded. So, can you tell me now what happened between us? No. Scarlet Flame's tone was indifferent. Forget about it. Hellion Vivian was rendered speechless. Old Master Hay looked at the two of them and couldn't help but laugh. Since the other party didn't want to talk about it, Hellion Vivian didn't continue to harp on this issue. However, she was sure of one thing. This man really couldn't get along with her. However, when it came to important matters, he was a trustworthy person. Hellion Vivian curled her thin lips and said, I will ask someone to send a batch of weapons over in a few days. When the weapons arrive, I want to modify them and let the people of the hidden army familiarize themselves with the operation of these weapons as soon as possible. Change weapons? Old Master Hay obviously didn't agree. Scarlet Flame's tone was very cold. Everyone in the hidden army has their own unique weapon, so there's no need for weapons. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian smiled. Old Master Hay thought that she didn't like to hear this, so he said, Girl, you just came to the army not long ago and aren't familiar with these people. They all have their own independent personalities. If you suddenly change weapons for them, they won't be used to it. I know that you're good at martial arts. Why don't you see if you can help them strengthen the foundation of their weapons and change the weapons? Hellion Vivian listened quietly. After hearing this, her thin lips curved slightly. I know all this, but this weapon of mine is different from other weapons. After speaking, Hellion Vivian stood up and glanced at the bat flying outside the tent. Suddenly, she straightened her left arm, and the small pistol in her hand was parallel to her line of sight. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she looked indescribably handsome. Bang! A gunshot sounded. The bat fell from the sky and landed in front of the military tent. There were still traces of blood on its body. Old Master Hay was stunned. He couldn't believe what he saw. How did such a small thing shoot down the bat from such a long distance? There was no bow or arrow. Scarlet Flame also glanced at the bat beside the tent. The bat was already completely dead. It was indeed very lethal. Old Master Hay looked at it curiously and asked, Vivian, what kind of hidden weapon is this? Why hadn't he seen it before? This isn't a hidden weapon. It's a pistol. However, the weapons I sent over are not just pistols. There was a smile on Hellion Weiwei's face. For example, De Xiong is an expert in heavy weapons. When the batch of weapons is completed, I will specially equip him with a strafing cannon. With one shot, he can destroy half of the city wall. Half of the city wall? When Old Master Hay heard the last sentence, he couldn't stay calm. Is this small thing really that powerful? Hellion Vivian weighed the gun in her hand. It still needs to be improved. After it's improved, it's completely possible. As the Queen of Arms in the 21st century, Hellion Vivian knew very well how influential firearms were in the era of cold weapons. She didn't just want to get the hidden army. She also wanted to select the most elite ace battle team from the hidden army. This group of mercenaries would be faster than anyone else. They would be able to win by surprise and enter and leave the major cities as if there was no one around. When the time came, they would be carrying long guns and cannons and sweeping away thousands of soldiers. It would be indescribably cool. They would be able to fight whoever they wanted. They could even take orders and make money. When she thought of this, Hellion Vivian's smile deepened. In ancient times, it was easy to defend a city, but difficult to attack it. If she had this team, she would definitely be able to reverse the situation. Old Master Hay naturally knew how powerful this was. His hand that was holding the teacup trembled slightly. Qi Yan's angular face tilted slightly. Then he reached out and took the pistol in Hellion Vivian's hand. He put it at the tip of his nose and sniffed it. His thick eyebrows furrowed slightly. This is the smell of firecrackers? That's right. Hellion Vivian's long and narrow eyes flashed with moonlight. She was clearly handsome. That's why I need you to purchase a large amount of firecrackers materials and heat-resistant metals. This matter requires absolute confidentiality. Qi Yan looked at her. He seemed to be a little careless, but he went straight to Hellion Vivian's weakness. How did you make this thing? Hellion Vivian would not say that she was actually a person who had transmigrated. Of course not. She would definitely be burned to death by him as a demon who had taken over her body. Therefore, she put on a serious expression and said, "I didn't want to say at first, but since you asked, I'll tell you." Chapter 349. At this point, Helly Vivian saw that Old Man Hay was looking at her seriously, so she continued, "One night, I was sleeping in bed when I suddenly dreamt of an immortal. In the dream, the immortal said that my bones were amazing and that I would definitely be extraordinary in the future. So, he told me how to make this gun and told me not to mention it to anyone else, or else I would be punished by the heavens." After that, Helly Vivian picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Old Man Hay sighed after hearing that. It was indeed a miracle. Helly Vivian smiled faintly as usual. Scarlet Flame sneered. When he leaned over to return the gun to her, he said in a low voice, "I haven't seen you for a few years, but your lying skills have improved a lot." Helly Vivian raised her eyes and looked at the pair of narrow and quiet eyes in front of her. She smiled and said, "You've become much more handsome too." Scarlet Flame paused, but his playful eyes sank when he saw Helly Vivian's slender neck. Helly Vivian didn't know what Scarlet Flame was thinking, so she continued, "Now, this gun can only fire one bullet at a time. After a while, I'll send someone to give you the design of a gun that can fire continuously. However, the design and production of that gun is 10 times more difficult than this single shotgun, so Old Man Hay will have to worry about it." Old Man Hay was shocked when he heard that. The appearance of a gun like this was already heaven-defying, but she could actually design a gun that could fire continuously. This was simply heaven-defying. And this person was actually the descendant of the He family that even he didn't think highly of. He had a hunch that 10 years, no, 100 years. 100 years later, when people mentioned the hidden army again, it would definitely be fresh in their minds. This was really too amazing. Old Man Hay calmed himself down and held the dragon-headed walking stick with his fingers. "Vivian, seeing you like this, your grandfather will know. Don't worry, when the design is sent over, I'll ask them to do their best to make it." The three of them talked about business for a while. Helly Vivian didn't forget that she had an appointment with the dean, so she had to go back before dawn. However, before she left, she didn't know why Scarlet Flame suddenly put his hand on her collar and pulled it up. Although it was just a touch, he withdrew it immediately. However, this action still looked extremely ambiguous and strange, especially in front of so many people. Helly Vivian's eyes flashed. On the way back, she couldn't help but ask Old Man Hay, "Young Master Scarlet Flame really doesn't have a crush on me?" Old Master Hay choked again. He really couldn't bear to hurt the child's self-confidence, but there were some things he still had to say. "Wei Wei, you're really thinking too much. He likes people with white skin." Hellion Wei Wei replied, "Oh, then he really has no taste." Hay was Vivian was Vivian, the overbearing second young master of the Hay clan had just used up all his strength to jump out of the room when he met Old Master Hay's incomparably deep gaze. Helly Vivian looked at her dumbfounded friend and tried her best to hold back her laughter. After all, He Eyes was someone that his family couldn't control since he was young. He simply smiled and said, "Grandfather, you can lock me up for a while, but you can't lock me up for life. Instead of always forcing me to marry a wife, why don't you let me earn more money? Moreover, these things really can't hold me back." As he spoke, he moved his arm and the iron chain fell to the ground. He Eyes reached out and dusted his long robe, looking like a gentleman again. Old Master Hay looked at him and massaged his temples as if he had a headache. "Forget it. I haven't slept well these days. You should go back to the academy and take care of Wei Wei." "Wei Wei?" He Eyes raised his eyebrows. When did his grandfather become so amiable? There was a problem. Old Master Hay waved his hand again. "Let's go. Goodbye." Helly Vivian didn't delay. After all, she still had an agreement. Since they were sitting in the same carriage and the oil lamp was lit, He Eyes naturally noticed something that others didn't. "What's with your neck?" "Neck?" Helly Vivian reached out and touched her neck. She glanced sideways at the reflection in the bronze mirror. In an instant, the temperature on her face rose a few degrees. She remembered Qi Yan's slightly cold gaze in the military camp. Only then did she realize that it was all because of the marks left by a certain prince. This doesn't look like a mosquito bite. The evil smile in Hei's eyes grew stronger, but he was a little surprised. He knew very well what kind of person the current third prince was. He was cold and distant on the surface, but he was also like that on the inside. Although he was cold and courteous, he wouldn't get close to people in reality. He also had his own set of principles. He would never argue with anyone, but you could feel his displeasure and the strong pressure he unintentionally exerted on you. So, until now, even the elders of the 4 great families didn't dare to really offend him. At that time, when Wei Wei was going to marry the third prince, Hei's was worried that she would become that person's chess piece. Because she didn't have any family power to support her. The third prince married her mostly because of the pressure from the retired emperor. But now, the third prince's behavior towards Wei Wei simply made Hei's jaw drop. He didn't expect that the third prince, who was seriously obsessed with cleanliness and hated physical contact with people, would so brazenly leave a kiss mark on another person's neck, brazenly treating it as if it was his own personal property. Some people said that on the wedding night, the third prince entered the bridal chamber because of Wei Wei's face. Since when did His Highness learn to consider other people's opinions? Most of the time, he was the one who made the decision on his own. So, the third prince couldn't help but do it? When he thought of this, Hei's looked at Hellion Vivian sympathetically. Being chosen by a man like the third prince was worse than being a chess piece. She even had to be branded before she left the house. Wei Wei looked at the expression in Hei's eyes and knew that he'd already guessed everything. She might as well not hide it anymore. She raised her eyebrows and said, "According to your experience, how many days does it take for this mark to disappear?" She couldn't always wear this lovey-dovey kiss mark and stroll back and forth in the academy. Judging from the strength, it will take at least 2 or 3 days. He smiled with a gloating tone. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. "It seems that we have to buy a long robe with a high collar." "Bring the royal along and let him spend the money." Hellion Vivian was quite satisfied with Hei's words. Soon, they arrived at the place where they parted ways. But what Hellion Vivian didn't expect was that the moment she jumped down from the carriage, she saw Yun Biluo and the rest returning to the academy at the same time. Chapter 350. Yun Biluo saw her as well. Her gaze landed on the carriage that was moving forward. If she was not mistaken, that should be the He family's carriage. I've long heard that Miss Wei Wei and young Master He are close friends. Seeing you today, it's true, Yun Biluo said with a gentle smile on her face. When the other 2 people heard what she said, they both curved their lips one after another. When they looked at Wei Wei again, their gazes clearly contained a bit of disrespect. It could be assumed that they also considered Wei Wei to be a girl who didn't know how to behave properly. Hellion Vivian did not bother with them. She yawned and continued walking forward. One of the young masters recommended by an aristocratic family sneered behind her. She was supposed to be carrying out a mission, but she went missing halfway. We even had to look for her outside the auction. The other person patted him on the shoulder. "You'll only make yourself angry if you say this. Don't worry, the battle spirit forces is not like other places. These things will be reported to the higher-ups. The mentors will naturally deal with it accordingly. They know who did and who didn't. When the time comes, we'll be the ones to pass, not the others." "You're right," that person laughed and gave Hellion Vivian a contemptuous look. When Hellion Vivian could not be found, Yun Biluo thought that she came back first because she had received some news. Now it seemed that she had just arrived at the academy. Thinking of this, Yun Biluo put on a decent smile on her gentle face. She nodded at the 2 people gently. "It's almost dawn, let's go." As she spoke, she glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, "Wei Wei was mainly in charge of the peripheral work. Although she left in the end, she did put in some effort. However, it's not convenient for us to tell you the news that we found. I hope you can understand." When Yun Biluo said this, her face was filled with a faint smile. She was like a fairy cruising in the holy light, pure and flawless. No one could bear to hurt her. Helian Wei Wei's lips curled into a cold smile. Her pair of starry eyes that were as tranquil as an ancient well didn't have the slightest ripple. Her voice was very calm. Of course I understand. Isn't this the reason why you guys used so many ways and means to throw me to the outskirts? Hearing this, the expressions of the two young masters changed. Yun Biluo bit her thin lips. Her eyebrows were filled with melancholy and sadness. She said in a hoarse voice, Wei Wei, did you misunderstand me because of His Highness? Misunderstanding? Helian Vivian smiled disapprovingly and said, How could I misunderstand you? Besides, Miss Yun, I have to remind you that we are not that close. You can call me Third Princess Consort. The words Third Princess Consort made Yun Biluo's fingers tighten. She looked at Helian Vivian as if she was in pain. I just want to make friends with you. Since Miss Vivian thinks that I'm out of your league, then forget it. Helian Vivian stopped in her tracks. Looking at the expression on Yun Biluo's face, she suddenly lowered her body. Helian Wei Wei's height had always been taller than the average girl. She was 170 centimeters tall with two slender long legs. Her chest and waist were very standard. When her charm was fully unleashed, it was a strong queen's temperament. Especially with her posture, she tilted her head and looked at Yun Biluo, who was a head shorter than her. Lowering her voice, she gave people a comfortable and handsome feeling. Yun Biluo, I know why you came to the White Academy. You don't have to pretend anymore. Others may not know why Heizhu ostracized me, but do you think I don't know? What benefits did you promise her to make her defy Beligaju's order and spread rumors about me everywhere? Yun Biluo's expression changed when she heard these words. She looked at Helian Vivian with eyes full of doubt and disbelief. She muttered, Miss Vivian, what are you talking about? What's wrong with Heizhu? Hearing Yun Biluo's denial, Helian Wei Wei slowly straightened her body and smiled faintly. Miss Yun, there's one thing about you that I really admire. Your acting skills are so good that it's almost perfect. Hearing this, Yun Biluo's face turned even paler. Her forbearance and grievance, coupled with her good looks. Compared to Helian Wei Wei's current indifferent and dark complexion, it was simply a contrast between Snow White and an evil empress. The two young masters in front could not stand it anymore. Miss Yun, why are you telling her these things? She didn't do anything. It's reasonable that she didn't get any news. Yun Biluo tried hard to take a deep breath, as if she was suppressing a great grievance. She raised her beautiful face and said in a weak and hoarse voice, I'm the one who's climbing up the social ladder. Let's go quickly. The dean is still waiting for our news. The two young masters nodded and looked at Helian Vivian coldly. When the time comes, don't be a sore loser. A sore loser? Helian Vivian rubbed the banknote that the dean insisted on giving to her with her fingers. She smiled faintly but with a hint of evil. Yuan Ming, on the other hand, was rejoicing in his misfortune. I wonder how these people will react when they hear the news of your victory. Helian Vivian smiled and did not say anything. She followed them. Her green and white robe fluttered slightly. Her temperament was cold and her laziness did not diminish at all. Soon, Yun Biluo and the rest arrived at the underground palace. Tu Su Feng sat in front of the desk with a cup of hot tea in his hand. He exuded the charm of a man of his age. He was gentle and gentlemanly. Have a seat. As usual, he asked someone to pour tea for the students. After seeing Helian Vivian, who came in last, he smiled and set his eyes on Yun Biluo and the rest. Yun Biluo stood up. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. She smoothly told Tu Su Feng about the result of their discussion at the auction. Tu Su Feng took a sip of tea with a smile on his face. That's it? Yun Biluo smiled gently. The intervention of the royal family made it impossible for us to continue the investigation. However, judging from the current news, Murong Hongtu is indeed problematic. Tu Su Feng nodded and put his hands on the desk. You said that Murong Hongtu met with rich businessmen. What's the purpose of his meeting with them? Yun Biluo paused and said, We're not sure about this. However, since he met with rich people, it should be related to corruption. That's right. The other two people chimed in. Their gazes towards Yun Biluo were filled with admiration. Miss Yun was indeed worthy of her reputation. Her reaction was quick enough. However, Tu Sufeng just glanced at Yun Biluo and did not say anything else. Yun Biluo did not notice at first. Later on, she realized that Tu Sufeng had not spoken for a long time. She asked awkwardly, "Dean?" Chapter 351. There were 6 of you when you went out? Tu Sufeng didn't follow up with her words. Instead, he suddenly said, they came back separately. Right now, there are still 2 people who haven't come back. Who can explain to me where those 2 people are right now? Yun Biluo was speechless. However, Helian Wei Wei opened her mouth and said, "It's my fault for forgetting to report this. Little 7 is still too young." After completing his mission, he followed the 3rd prince home to sleep. Young Master Han needs to clean up the loose ends. This way, no one will be able to know about this matter and achieve absolute secrecy. Young Master Han's identity is most suitable for this task. Very good. Tu Sufeng nodded, then met Yun Biluo's gaze. There must be something wrong with the person the battle spirit forces asked you to investigate. If there is nothing wrong, they won't ask you to investigate. The main thing is, have you found out what's wrong with Murong Hongtu? Obviously, you didn't find out anything. The 2 young masters were anxious to explain. However, they were interrupted by Tu Sufeng slowly. Young Master Liang, young Master Li, maybe you know these 2 people? As he spoke, Tu Sufeng glanced behind him and ordered, "You can come out now." A sloppy voice was heard. Helian Vivian followed the voice and looked over. She saw a clean-looking man strolling over. Gradually, his figure and appearance appeared in the swaying light. When the 2 young masters saw the man again, their expressions changed completely. They looked at each other in panic. It was obvious that they had a guilty conscience. Yun Biluo did not know what happened. There was no smile on Tu Sufeng's face. "I have already warned you again and again not to reveal your identities to anyone, and not to reveal any information about the battle spirit forces. But clearly, someone has ignored my warning." Upon hearing this, the 2 young masters fell back to their seats with a thud. How can this be? How can this person be here? Did you think that I wouldn't send someone to follow you when you were carrying out the mission? Tu Sufeng's gaze swept past them. Every one of you has your own test. Just because you were left alone and were threatened with a knife, you betrayed the battle spirit forces. The battle spirit forces will not take back such people. Charm, take these 2 people down and erase their memories. The man called Charm smiled evilly and easily lifted the 2 people up. "Let's go, you 2 cowards who are afraid of death." Yun Biluo was a little dizzy from the scene in front of her, but as long as she was not the one being taken away, everything was fine. "Miss Yun." Tu Sufeng retracted his gaze from the 2 screaming men and shifted it to Yun Biluo. "Your performance was a little too strong, but you passed." Hearing that, Yun Biluo's thin lips curled upwards. She then looked at Helian Vivian with a smile on her face. But what she didn't expect was that Tu Sufeng's next sentence was actually, "The winner of this test is still Wei Wei. Wei Wei, you can keep the prize money." Helian Vivian's expression did not change at all. On the other hand, Yun Biluo's smile looked a little stiff. She bit her lips awkwardly and forced a smile on her face. In an instant, she had returned to her original elegant demeanor. She raised her cup to Helian Vivian and said, "Wei Wei, congratulations." Helian Wei Wei did not refuse and glanced at her with interest. Then, she raised her cup slightly and drank the tea in one gulp. Her tone was indifferent as she said, "Miss Yun's memory doesn't seem to be very good. I've said before that we're not that close, so please don't call me Wei Wei anymore." As soon as she finished speaking, Helian Wei Wei did not care if Yun Biluo was feeling wronged like a young girl who lost her footing. She turned around and said to Tu Sufeng, "If there is nothing else, I will go back to sleep now." After going back and forth for an entire night, there were only 2 fights in one night. In addition, these people were not easy to deal with. especially the baby who possessed Murong Hongtu's body. It made Hellion Vivian even more uncomfortable. She even wondered if His Highness would use insecticide to kill her if he found out that she was using someone else's body one day. Tu Su Feng saw her yawning twice in a row but did not stop her from asking about the hidden army. Since she came back with a smile, the result should not be too bad. Yun Biluo looked at the two people who had ignored her. Her fingertips that were holding the white handkerchief tightened silently. Her face was stiff and slightly pale, and her beautiful eyes overflowed with a weak dim light. She looked at Tu Su Feng pitifully. However, Tu Su Feng did not look at her again. He lowered his head and seemed to be dealing with official business. After Hellion Vivian left, Yun Biluo spoke. Does the retired emperor still dislike me being around His Highness? Tu Su Feng put down the brush in his hand and faintly glanced at her. A few simple words. This is the Battle Spirit Forces camp. It's not suitable to talk about private matters. Moreover, this kind of matter, you should directly ask retired emperor. Yun Biluo knew when to advance and when to retreat. Now that she heard Tu Su Feng's words, she quickly suppressed the bitterness in her throat and smiled. I understand. I'll go back to my room. Dean, you should rest early too. Tu Su Feng nodded. He looked at Yun Biluo's disappearing figure and frowned slightly. He did not know what his cold nephew thought of Yun Biluo. So far, there were so many versions of the rumors. He did not know which one to believe. However, the only thing he was sure of was that the cold boy would not be swayed by anyone's appearance. This time, the Murong family's plan was completely wrong. At the same time, in the courtyard of the South District, Emperor Murong listened to the servant's report. The flesh on his face trembled. Good, this third prince. He dares to arrest anyone. He's really been spoiled by the retired emperor. I'll go to the palace now and report to the emperor. The Murong family has been loyal for 3 generations. The third prince can arrest anyone he wants. He has to give me an explanation. I've already told the empress, the servant stammered, but the emperor just allowed it. No one knows why. Emperor Murong was stunned. The emperor allowed it? The servant looked down. Emperor Murong still could not believe it. However, he heard a lukewarm voice coming from the study room. It was gentle and elegant. I've said it before. He's hard to deal with. Now you should know. Emperor Murong's expression changed when he heard the voice. He dismissed the servant and called out, Young master. Chapter 352. Under the morning light, a man dressed in white sat on a wooden chair. When he saw Emperor Murong, he closed the book in his hand and slowly stood up. His eyes were indifferent. Your Highness, it's been a long time. Please take a seat, young master. Emperor Murong was very polite when he saw the man. He even bowed and groveled. Please enlighten me, young master. What should I do next? The man smiled. What he said was enough to chill the surrounding air. I heard that the emperor is dying. Why don't you take his place, your Highness? After saying this, the man strolled into the drizzle. His figure was tall and straight, and could be considered perfect. The manservants in the mansion could not help but look at him. They did not know what their Highness said to him. But that day, Emperor Murong sat in the study room in the same posture for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. After the rain, the sky was bright. After Hellion Wei Wei returned, she lay on the bed and fell asleep. She'd long forgotten about her promise to give third prince a bath. She didn't know which corner of her mind. Someone came in. Hellion Vivian's first reaction was Qin Zhan. Qin Zhan must have come in to help her wash up. She had nothing to hide in front of Qin Zhan. He stretched lazily, got up, and walked around the screen. However, when he saw the person standing outside, he was stunned. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Why did His Highness appear here so early in the morning? Didn't he usually sleep until noon? Hellion Wei Wei realized that she was only wearing a pair of underwear on the lower half of her body. She lowered her head and looked at herself, then quickly retreated behind the screen. You wait for a moment? She couldn't express herself clearly while casually pulling out a pair of pajama pants. Beligaju walked in. His eyes were deep and there was something indescribable. Hellion Vivian put on the pajama pants. She saw that Beligaju's expression was not very good. He seemed to be colder than usual. She raised her eyebrows. You came here so early in the morning. Is there something you need from me? Bailey Jiaju glanced at her. His tone was neither cold nor light. You forgot. What? Hellion Vivian felt her scalp tighten every time she talked to His Highness. Did he say that she forgot to lock herself back in? Beligaju slowly raised his injured hand. Only then did Hellion Vivian remember that she had promised to bathe His Highness yesterday. But isn't it morning? Bailey Jiaju looked at Hellion Weiwei's expression. His voice was indifferent with a unique evil laziness. You really did forget about bathing for me. Aren't you supposed to bathe at night? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju reminded her, you didn't fulfill your promise last night. I was too busy yesterday. I'll go get some hot water now. She couldn't help it. His Highness' expression of, if you don't wash up, there will be a perverted way to punish you really made Hellion Vivian unable to resist. Not to mention that she had indeed promised. In addition, His Highness always made people feel guilty when he spoke. Therefore, Hellion Vivian wasn't too unwilling. She yawned lazily and scooped water with a wooden spoon with a faint smile on her face. Bailey Jiaju took an ancient book from her bookshelf, supported his chin with one hand, and sat by the window, flipping through it casually. His mind was filled with the appearance of Weiwei's pair of slender, and white legs from a moment ago. It's just that this was enough, but she was still wearing a slightly loose white undergarment. The red marks on her neck were clearly visible at a glance. The lapel of the garment was half covering and half covering, revealing a slender neck, simply made people want to swish. With a sound, the man exerted force in his hand and a corner of the ancient book was missing. Beligaju acted as if nothing had happened. He dusted his robe, but his eyes were deep, as if he was waiting for an opportunity to make a move. When Hellion Vivian poured the water into the bathtub, she felt a burning sensation on her back. When she turned her head, she saw Beligaju leaning to the side, elegantly and indifferently unbuttoning his collar. When his robe was removed, it was just that good figure that would make even God jealous. Hellion Vivian didn't look at him anymore. She turned her head and sprinkled flower petals into the wooden tub. She thought that a person who bathed 3 times a day would definitely have a certain level of desire for water quality. Unexpectedly, when Beligaju walked in, the space behind the screen seemed to be narrow and sealed, as if no one would see what he was doing. Hellion Vivian subconsciously moved back and took a white towel. She turned her face and said, the temperature of the water is just right. You can soak in now. As the steam filled the air, Hellion Vivian's face was calm. Beligaju looked at her playfully. A normal woman would definitely blush in this situation. But this little thing had a bit of a ruffian aura. Those who didn't know would think that she was very skilled. Beligaju curved his thin lips and stepped into the wooden tub with his long legs. In the middle of the night, he was only wearing a white robe with wide sleeves. Half of his thin and attractive chest was exposed. His ink-black hair fell behind, and a pair of indifferent eyes like an ancient well emitted a faint light, as if to suppress all the other colors. He was so handsome that it was indescribable. Hellion Vivian didn't feel that she was at a disadvantage at all to bathe such a beautiful man. Instead, she felt quite happy. She whistled and took the towel back and forth to wipe Beligaju. There wasn't any embarrassing scene. It was just that every time Hellion Vivian put her hand into the bathtub, she would be a little careful to avoid touching any places that weren't allowed to be touched. Beligaju smiled more and more playfully. After a long time, there was a bit of evil charm. Okay. Hellion Vivian retracted her hand and smiled lightly. Be careful not to get your left hand wet. Splat. The water droplets that she didn't have time to wipe dry dripped onto her white underwear as she spoke. The material of the clothes became a little transparent, and the red belly band inside could be vaguely seen. Beligaju's Adam's apple moved, and he stared at her chest without hiding anything. His voice became a little low and hoarse. Are you sure? Hellion Vivian looked at his slender figure. His shoulders, arms, and back had been washed. There shouldn't be a problem. Beligaju glanced at her and seemed to be a little careless. You didn't even touch the parts above the legs and below the abdomen. Above the back and below the waist. Hellion Vivian followed his words and looked over. Her face suddenly seemed to be burning, very hot. Even if she had a cold and ruffian temperament, when she met a man like Beligaju, she didn't understand how a certain highness could say that part in such an indifferent tone. It was as if she would be irresponsible if she didn't wash that part of his body. Bailey Jiaju looked at the rare crimson blush on her face and leaned over. His endlessly bewitching handsome face came closer to hers as he smelled the faint fragrance on her body. The tip of his nose lightly touched the soft strands of hair. His voice was as low as a whisper, "Why aren't you talking?" Chapter 353. Hellion Vivian's ears went numb for a moment. Then she smiled and got up nimbly. "There are some places that your highness should wash yourself." Beligaju, who was sitting in the bathtub, looked at Hellion Vivian with deep eyes. So straightforward? Hellion Vivian couldn't believe it. Beligaju really raised his hand. "Give me the bath mud." Hellion Vivian said "Oh," and handed it over. Beligaju didn't take it. Instead, he asked her a question that didn't make sense. "Are you only wearing a bra?" Hellion Vivian was not used to the layers of clothes of ancient people. Wearing a bra and a pair of loose cotton pants should be nothing. But Hellion Wei didn't know that when this kind of material was soaked in water, it was more beautiful than wearing nothing. Beligaju's long and narrow eyes darkened. Then he stretched out his hand as if he wanted to stand up. But because his left hand was still wrapped with a cloth, he suddenly slipped. Hellion Vivian subconsciously reached out to grab him. But she was directly pulled over by this force and fell into the bathtub. But when Hellion Vivian came out again, her body was already soaked. Even the hair that reached her waist was floating with the bright red roses. He seemed to be worried that she was hurt. He held her waist with one hand from behind. There was a devilish look in his eyes. It was really dangerous. The wound almost got wet. Hellion Vivian could even feel Beligaju's lips touching her earlobe. Yes, it was indeed a little dangerous. Hellion Vivian tilted her head, trying to avoid this overly intimate action. But Beligaju pressed her into the water and slowly undid the collar of her bra. Then he narrowed his eyes and touched the red mark on her neck. Hellion Vivian was touched by his action. Even her fingers were numb. And for some reason, the place where his fingers touched was especially sensitive. "It does look very deep." Bailey Jiaju's deep voice rang in her ears, matching the look in his eyes at this very moment. Hellion Vivian felt an uneasy heat all over her body. She glanced at Beligaju and wanted to stand up. "Don't move." Beligaju held her hand and moved closer to her. His expression was indifferent and noble. "If you continue to move, I can't guarantee that I can control myself." It seemed that he was saying that she was seducing him. But Hellion Vivian still didn't move. It wasn't because she was afraid, but the temperature from that part of his body, it was obviously bulging. Hellion Vivian was shocked by that shape. Her eyes trembled. However, Bailey Jiaju was still holding her waist, his eyes slightly darkened. It was still more comfortable to hug her when she was only wearing her underwear. However, if she was not wearing anything, the touch would definitely be better. Thinking of this, all the blood in his body seemed to be boiling, and all of them fused together, standing straight there. This made Beligaju move the person in his arms involuntarily. This kind of movement naturally made Hellion Wei's entire body even more tense. However, she stiffened and turned her head to look at him in confusion. Beligaju was very calm. "My legs are a little numb after staying in the same position for too long." Could it be that she was wrong? Hellion Vivian saw his indifferent expression and started to doubt her guess just now. Could it be that he didn't do it on purpose? At this time, Beligaju let go of her at the right time. He looked like a very well-mannered gentleman. "Go and change your clothes first." Hearing this, Hellion Vivian immediately stood up. She quickly got up and walked out of the bathtub. Beligaju looked at the figure that disappeared behind the screen and raised his eyebrows. Heh, she escaped quickly. You should at least leave the towel for me when you leave. Hellion Vivian heard the faint voice behind her. She snorted and used force in her left hand. The white towel in her hand fell into the bathtub in the shape of a parabola. Bailey Jiaju looked at the towel in front of him and curled his lips into a smile. Then he stood up from the bathtub and slowly wiped the water droplets off his body. His voice was slow and cold. Chilin, come out. Tis. Master can still find out like this. Fire Chilin showed its faintly discernible figure. It lowered its head and licked its mighty big claws. Beligaju glanced at it coldly. That glance made it and its claws stiffen. Damn it, it couldn't move. How could this be? When it raised its head again, it saw that its master's eyes had a hint of golden light. Fire Chilin then realized that its master had used the body-fixing technique on it. It was instantly melancholy. Master, I didn't offend you, right? When I do something, I don't like to have people watching. Beligaju's eyes were indifferent. Fire Chilin coughed softly. I didn't see, really. But, Master, you did it on purpose just now, right? How could you not be able to stand and your wound was wet? You clearly wanted to drag me into the water with you. Beligaju didn't deny it. He threw the white towel in his hand to the side and walked out of the bathtub with his upper body that made people jealous. Every texture of his muscles was just right. Wait, what should I do? Is Master not planning to let me go? I was just telling the truth. Fire Chilin wanted to cry but had no tears. It could only maintain its standing posture with one leg. Its tongue was still licking its claws. Its reflection in the bathtub made it look stupid no matter how you looked at it. It was ruining its image. Coincidentally, a sparrow flew over and landed on a branch. It looked at Fire Chilin with a face full of worship. What do you think Boss Chilin is doing? His posture is so strange. I don't know either. Fire Chilin heard this and immediately replied in a deep voice, I'm practicing my balancing ability. Image. It must maintain its handsome and heroic image in the eyes of cute little beasts. So you're practicing your balancing ability. The sparrows began to chirp and jump again. They looked at Fire Chilin with starry eyes. Boss is so handsome. Fire Chilin nodded naturally. His posture was very domineering. One of the sparrows jumped down and stared at Fire Chilin with its eyes wide open. Boss, can you change your posture? Let's see your other actions first. Fire Chilin. Damn. Master, help quickly undo my body-freezing spell. Hearing the wailing behind him, Bailey Jiaju did not have the slightest intention of turning his head back. The corners of his mouth curved into an evil smile, his slender fingers rubbed his slightly damp black hair, bent over to pour himself a cup of tea, took a sip, then slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at Wei Wei who was standing in front of the bed. What are you doing? Hellion Vivian didn't expect him to come out so soon. She was still looking at the clothes in front of her, wondering which one could cover the marks on her neck. She was frowning at the long robes on the bed. When she turned around, she saw a certain highness with a bare upper body, long legs and long arms, looking very seductive. Chapter 354. It was probably because of his temperament. That kind of dense, cold, and ascetic temperament made it even harder for people to look away when they saw him like this. A man like this was really rare in the world. Hellion Vivian was a person who cared a lot about appearances. After one glance, she felt that it wasn't enough, so she took another look. With this kind of physique, if he were to film in the 21st century, countless people would definitely lick the screen. Even though Hellion Vivian had seen many world-class stars, she still felt that very few people had the kind of luxurious and enchanting aristocratic aura that His Highness had. Noticing Hellion Vivian's gaze, Beligaju's lips curved up. That kind of smile made him look even more handsome. Hellion Vivian took another look at him, but coincidentally met his gaze as well. It was as if he was deliberately catching her. For a moment, Hellion Vivian seemed to hear the stagnation in the air. "Why are you looking at me?" Beligaju asked with a smile. "Hellion Vivian?" "We were clearly looking at each other. Why did it seem like I was peeping at you?" Beligaju looked at her expression. His unsatisfied mood improved again. The corners of his mouth curved up, and his entire body emitted a unique charm. Hellion Vivian felt that this person was constantly using his handsome man to trick her. Fortunately, she had better self-control. If she had pounced on him, wait a minute, why did she want to pounce on him? "Woman, don't suppress your natural instincts." Yuan Ming's evil voice sounded. "You have less than 5 days left. The closer it is to dual cultivation, the more your body is out of your control. Why do you have to work so hard? If you want it, then do it." Hellion Wei didn't pay attention to Yuan Ming and directly stuffed him back into the celestial boundary space. She looked at Bailey Jiaju's apathetic and narrow eyes and sat on the wooden chair with her legs slightly crossed. She drank a mouthful of tea and then said, "I want to go buy some clothes." "Buy clothes?" Beligaju didn't expect to get such an answer. The hand that was drying his hair obviously paused. Hellion Vivian nodded and thought to herself, "It's all because of you, the main culprit. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to specially buy a high-collared robe in the middle of summer. You really should buy more clothes to wear." Beligaju glanced at her again. His gaze was indifferent and noble, like a domineering Xiao looking at a homeless person on the streets. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What kind of look was that? She was also very rich. Let's go shopping now." Beligaju put on the robe, and his posture was as smooth as flowing water. Hellion Vivian didn't know how to react. Shadow. Beligaju called out the shadow guards accompanying him, "Go and get ready." And Ing turned his head and replied, "Yes. Actually, I can go by myself." "You're so busy." Hellion Vivian smiled at Beligaju. She was as smart as usual. Shopping was so troublesome, people like the royal family definitely wouldn't like it. Unexpectedly, Beligaju only gave her 3 words, "No." Hellion Vivian. Why not? "I really can't agree with your taste." Beligaju took the lead and walked out. There it is again. That cold and condescending gaze. It really made people want to beat him up. Hellion Vivian told herself to get used to it. After all, in the eyes of a certain highness, she was just a 2-legged prey. When Bailey Jiaju turned around, what he saw was Hellion Wei's creased eyebrows with a conflicted look on her face. Immediately, his thin lips curved into a smile. Hellion Vivian silently ridiculed. Sure enough, a certain highness interest was something a mortal like her couldn't understand. It couldn't be more perverted. However, looking at his clothes, she knew that Beligaju had good taste. It wasn't a bad idea to bring such a man out shopping. Before we set off, let's eat something first. Hellion Vivian rubbed her stomach. She had been hungry for a long time. Right now, she only wanted to eat the fragrant white rice. It would be even better if it could be paired with a plate of spiced beef. Beligaju didn't look at her with that discriminatory gaze this time. He asked someone to prepare the meal. The 2 of them didn't eat in the house. Instead, they ate in the pavilion in the courtyard. The wine and dishes were served, and each dish was overflowing with fragrance. Hellion Vivian ate with satisfaction. Royal family didn't want to eat. She basically finished all the food that was served to her. There was no sense of discomfort. Both of them were very lazy people. Their good upbringing could be seen at the dining table. It was just that one ate like a poster, while the other was more natural. She wasn't picky about food. They complemented each other. It was rare to see a girl like Hellion Vivian who ate so much. She wasn't pretentious and ate whatever was fed to her. This made Beligaju smile even more. He felt that she saved him a lot of trouble in terms of feeding. After the 2 of them finished eating, they walked side by side toward the gate of the academy when they saw that it was almost time. Hellion Vivian also began to notice that the number of shadow guards following Beligaju was more than 10 times more than usual. Although they didn't come out and hid well, Hellion Vivian could still sense the difference. Now that the power in the imperial court was unstable, There would be a lot of trouble after His Highness' identity was exposed in the White Academy. In addition, he had caught Murong Hongtu yesterday. Empress Murong would definitely not let it go. Now that he thought about it, His Highness probably had more enemies than him. Women played with tricks, while men played with military power. There would definitely be some movement in the Murong mansion. It would probably be in 1 or 2 days. Hellion Vivian thought of this. She paused and said, "I'm already doing the firearms you mentioned last time. I'll be out in 2 days." Beligaju nodded faintly. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a deep meaning that made her scalp numb. "You seem to be very good at this." Hellion Vivian paused. Fortunately, Beligaju didn't continue to ask. He looked at her faintly. "What about the name?" Hellion Vivian put on a serious face. "I'm still thinking. The main thing is what kind of name he wants. Doesn't the royal realize how difficult it is to serve him?" It was very clear that His Highness, who had always lived in the clouds, did not have this kind of feeling, because the people below him had to use all their brains just to guess his thoughts. They were eager to be able to serve this master, so how could they dare to find fault with His Highness? The good thing about Beligaju was that he had a good family education. Although this kind of education was just a disguise, it still made people feel that he was very polite. "Where do you want to go later?" Hellion Vivian was casual. "Just find a cloth store." As long as she could find one with a collar to cover the marks on her neck. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.